Hello there and welcome to the Sleepy Now project. Thank you for choosing this quiet corner of the evening, this soft space where history whispers rather than shouts, where ancient pathways unfold like silk scarves in the gentlest of breezes. Your presence here, in this moment of stillness, is a gift to yourself, a permission to let the day's tensions drift away like sand through patient fingers. In this sacred pause between waking and sleeping, you've found a sanctuary where time moves differently, where the urgent gives way to the eternal, where the noise of now softens into the wisdom of then. What are the most soothing journeys you can imagine? Perhaps it's the rhythm of camel bells echoing across moonlit dunes, their bronze songs spacing out the vastness into manageable breaths. Or maybe it's the rustle of silk against weathered hands, that whisper of fabric that has travelled 10,000 miles to rest, finally against waiting skin. Or could it be the distant murmur of merchants speaking in tongues that blend like spices in a warming pot, their words creating a music that needs no translation to be understood? Tonight, we'll wander together along paths worn smooth by countless travellers, paths that connected not just places but hearts, not just markets but dreams, not just empires but the eternal human longing to reach beyond the horizon. Wants nothing more than to wrap around you like the softest blanket and carry you toward rest. Tonight, we'll trace the Silk Road, that shimmering network of paths that stretch like golden threads between sunrise and sunset, between the jade gardens of ancient China and the marble forums of Rome. But this isn't just a story of trade routes and caravans, of commodities and currencies. No, this is a lullaby of human connection, a meditation on how ideas and dreams can travel farther than any single person ever could. It's a reminder that every thread of silk carried more than just its own shimmer. It carried stories, prayers, recipes, philosophies, and the indomitable human spirit that insists, always, on reaching toward the unknown. As we journey together through these next hours, you'll find yourself drifting towards sleep first, with knowledge settling into your mind like silk settling onto skin, soft, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably present, creating layers of understanding that will remain long after you wake. Let your body sink now, feeling how your shoulders drop like dunes settling after a desert wind has passed. Notice how each breath becomes deeper, slower, as if you're breathing the same rhythm as those ancient travellers who knew that hurrying across such vast distances was futile, that the journey itself was where life happened. Your muscles release their hold on the day's worries, melting like butter in a brass bowl warmed by Central Asian sun. Feel your jaw soften, your forehead smooth, your hands open like flowers greeting the night. Each part of you remembers in this moment that tension is just a habit, and habits can be gently, lovingly released. And now your thoughts, those busy merchants of the mind, begin to slow their constant trading. They become like grains of sand carried on a caravan wind, still present, still part of the journey, but no longer urgent, no longer demanding your attention. Each thought that arises can simply join the caravan, finding its place among the gentle procession of images and sensations that will guide us through the night. There's room in this caravan for everything. Your worries can ride alongside your wonders, your tasks can rest next to your dreams, all moving at the same peaceful pace toward a horizon where everything is transformed by distance and starlight. As we begin our journey eastward, toward the first silk threads ever spun, let your consciousness become as fluid as the trade routes themselves, flowing, adapting, always finding the path of least resistance toward rest. Long before the first strand of silk was ever unwound from its cocoon, long before the word road could even describe the network of paths that would one day span continents, There were already threads connecting distant peoples, threads as delicate and essential as spider silk catching the morning dew, threads invisible to the eye but felt in the heart whenever strangers met and recognized each other as fellow travellers through the mystery of being human. Picture, if you will, the ancient world as it was 8,000 years ago, when the first farmers were just learning to coax wheat from the earth, and the idea of cities was still a dream waiting to be born, sleeping in the collective unconscious like seeds beneath winter snow. Even then, in that dawn time of human civilization, something precious was moving across the landscape. Obsidian, that volcanic glass as black as a moonless night and as sharp as necessity itself. From the volcanic peaks of Anatolia, where the earth itself had breathed out this dark treasure in ancient pyroclastic whispers, pieces of obsidian began their slow journey outward, like ripples in a still pond, each trade creating circles that would eventually overlap and merge into the great flowing river of the Silk Road. These earliest traders weren't merchants in any sense we would recognize. They had no concept of profit margins or market share, no ledgers or letters of credit. They were simply people who had found something beautiful or useful and wanted to share it, to trade it for something equally precious from far away. They moved like fireflies blinking across night fields, each exchange of goods a small light in the darkness of prehistory, each trade creating a tiny connection that would, over millennia, grow into the great web of human interdependence that we still inhabit today. In your mind's eye, see these first travellers, wrapped in furs against the mountain cold, their precious obsidian carefully bundled in leather pouches that had been cured with smoke and patience. They walk paths that animals had worn before them, deer tracks, wolf runs, the ancient highways of migration that preceded human footsteps by millions of years. They didn't know they were laying the foundation for something magnificent. They only knew that beyond the next hill, across the next river, there were people who had things they'd never seen, different foods that might fill the belly in new ways, different stones that might cut cleaner or last longer, different ways of seeing the world that might explain mysteries their own stories couldn't touch. The obsidian would travel from hand to hand, village to village, its journey taking years, even generations. A blade shaped in Anatolia might eventually reach the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, carried by a chain of trades so long that its origin would be forgotten, becoming mythical, the stone itself taking on magical properties in the minds of those who had never seen a volcano. It would be treasured not just for its usefulness, but for its strangeness, for the story it carried of distant mountains and different skies, of people who knew secrets about working stone that seemed impossible, almost divine. And in return, perhaps a handful of the first cultivated wheat seeds would begin their own slow journey back along those tentative paths. Imagine those seeds, each one a potential field, a possible harvest, a future bread, carried in a pouch close to the body, protected like the precious genetic information they were. The woman who first planted Mesopotamian wheat in Anatolian soil didn't know she was participating in the agricultural revolution. She only knew that these seeds from the far valley grew differently, needed different prayers, produced grain that tasted of distant rain. This is how it began, not with grand plans or imperial ambitions, not with manifestos or missions, but with simple human curiosity and the desire to connect. Each trade was like a whispered conversation between strangers who couldn't speak the same language, but could understand the universal gesture of offering something precious in exchange for something equally valued. Watch as they meet at some neutral ground, a riverside, a mountain pass, a grove of ancient trees that both groups hold sacred. They lay out their goods on flat stones or woven mats, each item placed with care, almost ceremonially. The negotiation happens through gestures, through facial expressions, through the universal language of human need and human generosity. These early exchanges were creating invisible threads across the landscape, threads that would one day support the weight of entire civilizations' dreams. Like the mycorrhizal networks that connect forest trees beneath the soil, these trade connections were creating a web of mutual support that would eventually span continents. Each successful trade created trust, and trust created the possibility of future trades. Each journey that ended safely encouraged another journey. Each new food that didn't poison, each new tool that worked as promised, each new story that entertained through the long winter nights. All of these built the confidence that the unknown wasn't always dangerous, that the stranger might be a friend waiting to happen. As you listen to these words, let yourself feel the patient rhythm of those ancient footsteps, the slow accumulation of paths worn into the earth by countless journeys. There's no hurry in this story. It took thousands of years for these first tentative threads to strengthen into the great rope of the Silk Road. Like sleep itself approaching on soft feet, the connections between East and West grew gradually, naturally, inevitably. They grew the way relationships grow, the way trust grows, the way understanding grows, not all at once in some blinding revelation, but slowly, through countless small acts of faith in the basic goodness of reaching out to another human being. The obsidian traders are long dust, their names unrecorded, their faces unremembered, but their legacy lives on in every exchange, every handshake, every moment when strangers become partners. They taught us that distance is just an invitation to journey, that difference is just an opportunity to learn, that the space between us is not empty but full of potential paths waiting to be walked. Let us rest a moment beneath the stars as those first traders might have done, feeling the eternal patience of stone and star, before we continue our journey into the secret heart of silk. In the gardens of ancient China, where morning mist clings to mulberry leaves like the memory of dreams, where dewdrops tremble on branches like tears of joy, at another day's beginning, one of humanity's most enchanting secrets was born. The story of silk begins not with grand ceremonies or imperial decrees, but with the quiet munching of small white caterpillars, their movements as rhythmic and soothing as a lullaby hummed in the pre-dawn darkness, as regular as breath itself, as patient as the seasons turning their great wheel. Picture, if you will, those mulberry groves in the gentle light of dawn, their leaves trembling with dew that catches the first rays of sun like tiny prisms, breaking light into its component wonders. The trees themselves seem to breathe in the morning coolness, their leaves rustling with secrets that only the silkworms understand. These groves are sanctuaries of transformation, temples where one of nature's most elegant miracles unfolds with a reliability that humans would come to depend upon, generation after generation. The silkworms, for that is what those humble caterpillars would come to be called, move across these leaves with a dedication that speaks of ancient purpose. Each bite, each movement is part of a transformation as magical as any fairy tale, yet as real as the breath moving through your lungs right now, as tangible as the softness of your pillow against your cheek. Watch them closely, these small white creatures barely longer than a child's finger, and you'll see in their methodical munching a kind of meditation, a focus that humans spend lifetimes trying to achieve. Listen closely and you might hear it, the soft sound of countless tiny mouths working, a whisper that has echoed through Chinese gardens for 5,000 years. It's a sound like gentle rain on leaves, like the softest possible percussion, like the earth itself humming a tune of contentment. The women who first discovered this secret were patient observers, perhaps mothers watching over children who had found these interesting caterpillars, perhaps weavers already skilled in working with plant fibers who recognized something special in the way these creatures spun. They watched as the caterpillars grew fat and sleepy on their diet of mulberry leaves, their white bodies becoming almost translucent with the silk beginning to form inside them. They watched as the caterpillars began to sway their heads in figure-8 patterns, a dance as old as time, beginning to extrude from their mouths a single thread so fine it was almost invisible, catching the light like the faintest spiderweb. The cocoon itself is a miracle of engineering that modern science still marvels at. Spun from a single thread that can stretch for nearly a mile. Imagine that. A mile of the finest thread wrapped around and around in a shell no bigger than a child's thumb. The caterpillar works tirelessly for 3 days and nights, never stopping, never resting, creating layer upon layer of protection for its transformation. Inside this silken chamber, one of nature's most profound mysteries unfolds. The caterpillar literally dissolves itself, becoming a soup of potential, before reorganizing into something entirely new, something with wings. Under the soft glow of tang-red lanterns, in workshops that smelled of steam and patience, skilled hands learned to interrupt this transformation at just the right moment. The timing had to be perfect. Too early and the silk would be weak. Too late, and the emerging moth would break the precious continuous thread. The cocoons would be gathered like precious eggs, sorted by size and quality, each one holding within it the potential for beauty that would last centuries. The process of unwinding requires water heated to just the right temperature, hot enough to soften the sericin that glues the threads together, but not so hot as to damage the delicate protein structure of the silk itself. It's a dance of temperatures and timing, performed in workshops where the air is thick with steam that smells faintly of leaves and rain, where the windows fog with the breath of industry. Watch as the threads are gathered, 5 or 6 cocoons at a time, their individual strands so fine they must be combined to create a usable thread. The reeling women sit at their basins, their fingers finding the loose end of each cocoon with the sensitivity of someone reading Braille, coaxing the thread free with movements passed down through generations. The silk emerges wet and gleaming, stronger than steel of the same diameter, yet soft as a whisper against skin. The sound of the reeling fills the workshop, a soft, continuous whisper like wind through grass, punctuated by the gentle splash of water, the creak of the wooden reels turning. It's a soundscape of patience, of time transformed into tangible beauty. Each motion is meditation, each length of silk a prayer made tangible. The women often sing as they work, soft songs that match the rhythm of the reeling, songs about mulberry trees and patient love, about threads that connect hearts across impossible distances. The secret of silk was guarded as carefully as any treasure in the Emperor's vault, protected by laws that made revealing it to outsiders punishable by death. For 1,000 years, China alone knew how to transform the silkworm's patient labour into cloth that felt like clouds against skin, that shimmered like moonlight on water, that was so light it seemed to float rather than drape. Guards were posted at the borders, travellers were searched, and the penalty for smuggling silkworm eggs or mulberry seeds was execution. Yet secrets, like silk threads themselves, have a way of eventually unwinding. The very beauty of silk ensured that it would travel, that it would seek out distant hands to appreciate its softness, distant eyes to admire its lustre. Each bolt of silk that left China carried with it not just the material itself, but the whisper of those mulberry groves, the patience of those careful hands, the dreams of those transformed caterpillars who gave their one life to create something eternal. The silk itself seems to remember its origins, hold a piece of ancient silk to the light, and you can almost see the mulberry leaves that fed the silkworms, almost hear the songs of the reeling women, almost feel the care with which each thread was drawn from its cocoon. It carries within its fibres the essence of transformation, From leaf to worm to cocoon to thread to cloth, each stage a small miracle that adds to the greater wonder. As you drift deeper into relaxation, imagine your own thoughts spinning themselves into something beautiful and protective, creating around you a cocoon of peace as perfect as any silkworm's creation. Feel how the story of silk is also a story of patience rewarded, of secrets that bless even as they're kept, of beauty that insists on being shared no matter how carefully it's guarded. Let the whisper of silk through your imagination be as soothing as the sound of those ancient reeling wheels, turning eternally in the workshops of memory. Let the whisper of unwinding silk guide us forward, toward the moment when this precious thread would begin its journey across continents, carried by a man whose name would echo through history. In the year when stars aligned in patterns that court astronomers would discuss in hushed tones, when the Han dynasty stood at the height of its power, yet felt the constant pressure of nomadic threats from the north, Emperor Wu made a decision that would change the shape of the world. He chose a man named Zhang Qian to carry out a mission as delicate as silk thread and as important as the empire itself, to travel west beyond the known world and find allies among the distant Yeji people who nursed their own grievances against the fierce Xiongnu. Picture Zhang Qian on the eve of his departure, standing in the courtyard of his home as night settles over Chang'an like a silk blanket embroidered with stars. The air is thick with the scent of jasmine and the weight of destiny. His wife moves quietly through their rooms, packing items for a journey whose length no one can predict. Dried fruits that will last through deserts, medicines for ailments not yet encountered, small tokens of home that will grow heavier with meaning as the miles multiply. His children sleep, unaware that their father will return to them changed, aged, carrying within him maps of lands they cannot imagine. He knows the journey ahead will take him through territories no Chinese official has ever seen, across deserts that swallow caravans whole, through mountains where the air grows so thin that thoughts themselves seem to evaporate. Yet there's something in Zhang Qian that rises to meet this challenge. Call it curiosity, call it duty, call it the ineffable human need to see what lies beyond the next horizon. As he performs his final prayers to his ancestors, asking for their protection on roads they never travelled, he becomes the embodiment of every explorer who ever looked at the unknown and saw not danger, but possibility. As his expedition sets out in the early morning mist, moving like a slow river of horses, camels, and determined men, every hoofbeat becomes a heartbeat of a nascent network that doesn't yet know it's being born. 100 men ride with him, selected for their skills in languages, in survival, in the arts of peace and war. Zhang Qian rides at the front, his eyes fixed on the western horizon, where the sun sets in colours that no Chinese painter has yet captured. The deep purples and burning oranges of foreign skies, the golds and roses that speak of different atmospheres, different qualities of light. The journey begins with familiar territories giving way to the unfamiliar, like walking from a well-lit room into gathering dusk. The Great Wall falls behind them, that monument to separation becoming a memory, then a story, then a dream of safety they once knew. The landscape changes like a slow revelation, fertile fields surrendering to grasslands, grasslands breaking into desert, each transformation preparing them for the strangeness ahead. But the journey, like many important things in life, doesn't unfold as planned. In the grasslands controlled by the Xiongnu, China's fierce northern neighbours, Zhang Qian's dream meets its first great test. The Xiongnu patrol these lands like wolves patrol their territory, alert to any intrusion, especially one that might upset the delicate balance of power they maintain. The capture happens almost gently. One moment Zhang Qian's expedition is travelling under stars as thick as spilled milk, following guides who know every water source and safe camping ground. The next they're surrounded by riders who move through the darkness like shadows given form. The Xiongnu Khan is no fool. He recognizes in Zhang Qian something more than a simple traveller or trader. Here is an official envoy, carrying with him the seal of the Han Emperor, clearly on a mission that involves the lands beyond Xiongnu control. Rather than kill him, which would be the simple solution, the Khan makes a more subtle choice. Zhang Qian will be kept, treated well, watched carefully. Perhaps in time, he will reveal his purposes. Perhaps in time he will see the wisdom of abandoning his mission. For 10 years, imagine that, 10 years, a length of time that transforms children into adults, that sees empires rise and fall, Zhang Qian lives among the Xiongnu. They treat him with the careful courtesy given to valuable prisoners. He's given a tent, servants, eventually a wife from among their people. She bears him children who learn to walk on grassland rather than palace stones, who speak Xiongnu words before Chinese, who know the taste of mare's milk before rice wine. Yet every night as Zhang Qian lies beside his family in their felt tent, listening to the wind sing across the steppes, he dreams of his mission. It pulls at him like the moon pulls at the tide, constant and irresistible. He learns the Xiongnu language until he dreams in it, studies their customs until he could pass for one of them in darkness. But he never forgets the jade seal hidden in his belongings, never forgets the Emperor's words, never forgets that somewhere to the west, the Yuezhi wait unknowing for an alliance that might change everything. He watches his captors, learning patience from masters of the art. The Xiongnu have survived by understanding the rhythms of grass and weather, by knowing when to move and when to stay, when to fight and when to fade away. From them, Zhang Qian learns that time moves differently on the steppes, that urgency is often the enemy of achievement, that the indirect path sometimes leads more surely to the goal than the straight line. When escape finally comes, it arrives as quietly as dawn breaking over the grasslands. After 10 years, the Xiongnu's vigilance has naturally relaxed. Zhang Qian has become a fixture, a part of their world. His children play with their children. His wife is sister to their wives. Surely after so long he has given up his foolish mission. But they don't understand the depth of Chinese patience, the way duty can lie dormant like seeds in the desert, waiting for the rare rain that will call them to life. Zhang Qian and a small group of loyal companions, men who have shared his captivity and kept faith with his dream, slip away in the confusion of a seasonal migration. They take what they need and nothing more, moving west with the desperate care of men who know they won't get a second chance. Behind them, they leave families who will mourn their absence. Ahead of them lies uncertainty vast as the sky. They cross the Pamirs, those mountains that would later be called the roof of the world, where each breath comes hard and precious as pearls. The paths are so narrow that horses must be led in single file, like beads on a thread, each step a prayer that the mountain won't shrug and send them tumbling into clouds. At night, they huddle in caves or rough shelters, the cold so intense it seems to freeze thought itself. Yet they continue, driven by something stronger than comfort, stronger than fear. On the other side of the mountains they find wonders that make the hardships fade like stars at dawn. The kingdom of Dayuan greets them with ceremonies involving horses. Ah, such horses! Animals that seem to have been breathed into being by the wind itself, their legs long and swift as flowing water, their coats shining like silk, their eyes holding intelligence that seems almost human. Zhang Qian watches them race across fields of alfalfa, another discovery, this nutritious fodder that grows thick and green, and knows he's seeing something that will transform Chinese cavalry. In Kangju they encounter grapes growing heavy on the vine, their juice sweet with possibilities no Chinese winemaker has imagined. Zhang Qian tastes this foreign fruit and thinks of the Emperor's gardens, imagining these vines taking root in Chinese soil, their fruit becoming part of palace banquets. Every new food, every new craft, every new idea is carefully noted, stored in memory against the day of return. Finally, after years of travel, they reach the Yuezhi, only to find that these former enemies of the Xiongnu have grown comfortable in their new lands. The fire for revenge that the emperor hoped to fan has cooled to embers. They listen politely to Zhang Qian's proposals for alliance, but their king's eyes drift to his peaceful fields, his prosperous cities. Why should they leave this plenty to wage war on distant steppes? The past is past, they say, with the wisdom of those who have learned to let go of old wounds. Zhang Qian's official mission has failed, but his true achievement is just beginning. He spends months among the Yuezhi and their neighbours, his curiosity unflagging despite the diplomatic disappointment. He watches how goods and ideas flow like underground rivers between settled folks and nomads, between east and west. He sees Chinese silk in markets that supposedly have no contact with China, sees Roman glass that has travelled from the other end of the world, sees ideas and religions mixing like streams converging into a great river. The return journey becomes another capture, another period of waiting among the Xiongnu, this time only a year before he escapes again. When Zhang Qian finally arrives back in Chang'an, 13 years after he left, only 2 of his original 100 men remain. He's aged beyond his years, his hair white as the mountain snows he crossed, his face mapped with lines that tell of winds and weather no Chinese official has known. But what he brings back is worth more than any military alliance. He brings knowledge of the Western lands, understanding of how the threads of trade already connect distant peoples, vision of what could be if those threads were strengthened and multiplied. He tells the Emperor of the heavenly horses of Fergana, the grapes of Sogdiana, the vast networks of trade that move goods from Rome to India to lands beyond. His words paint pictures of possibility that capture imperial imagination more surely than any alliance could. As you rest in the comfort of your bed, far from the hardships Zhang Qian endured, let his patience inspire a deep calm within you. His journey reminds us that the most important paths are rarely straight, that detours and delays often lead to discoveries we never expected. Every setback in his mission became a lesson, every year of captivity a chance to understand another way of being in the world. Like Zhang Qian learning to see the Xiongnu not just as captors but as teachers, we too can learn to see obstacles as opportunities, delays as chances to gather strength for the journey ahead. Like Zhang Qian resting in his tent under foreign stars, let us pause here, gathering strength for the next stage of our journey through the night-dark desert. Night falls across the Gobi desert like a blessing after the day's fierce heat, and with it comes a transformation as complete as any silk moth's metamorphosis. Where the sun had beaten down with hammering intensity, turning the sand into a skillet and the air into a shimmering veil of heat, now coolness spreads across the landscape like water finding its level, like mercy after trial, like sleep after the longest day. The caravan that has been moving since before dawn, following paths marked more by memory than by any visible road, finally, gratefully, comes to rest. Listen, can you hear them? The camel bells that have been ringing their rhythmic song all day now slow, their bronze voices becoming intermittent, then still, like wind chimes settling after a breeze has passed. These bells, each with its own particular tone, some deep and mellow as aged wine, others bright and clear as spring water, have been the caravan's heartbeat, marking time and distance in their endless conversation with the desert silence. Each camel wears a different bell, and the caravan master knows his animals so well he can tell in the darkness which one has strayed just by the sound of its bell fading into distance. Now, as the camels are unburdened and hobbled for the night, the bells sing their evening song, slower, deeper, like a lullaby for the desert itself. The animals sink to their knees with groans that speak of honest exhaustion, their day's work done. Steam rises from their backs where the heavy packs have rested, and they shake themselves like dogs, sending up small clouds of dust that catch the last light of dusk like powdered gold. The caravan master, his face carved by wind and sun into a map of all the journeys he's ever taken, moves among his charges with the careful attention of a parent checking on sleeping children. His hands, brown and weathered as old leather, run over each camel with practiced knowledge. He checks their feet for stones that might have wedged between the soft pads, their backs for sores where the heavy packs might have rubbed despite the thick felt saddle blankets. These ships of the desert, with their knowing eyes and impossible eyelashes that would make any beauty envious, have carried not just silk and spices but the very possibility of connection across impossible distances. The camels understand the desert in ways humans never will. They can smell water from miles away, feel sandstorms approaching when the sky still looks clear, find their way by landmarks invisible to human eyes. They walk with a rhythm that eats up miles without seeming to hurry, their broad feet spreading to grip the sand, their long legs carrying them over terrain that would exhaust a horse in hours. And they remember every water source, every safe camping ground, every place where predators might lurk. The caravan master has learned to trust their wisdom, to let them guide when his own knowledge fails. As darkness completes its soft conquest of the sky, the camp transforms into a small city of felt and hide. Tents bloom like night flowers, their shapes familiar as coming home. The travellers work with movements refined by repetition, each person knowing their role in this nightly choreography. The tents are positioned with careful attention to wind patterns, their entrances facing away from the prevailing wind that everyone knows will rise just before dawn, carrying with it sand fine as flour. Inside each tent, the exhausted travellers create their temporary homes with touches that speak of the human need for comfort, even in the harshest places. Carpets that have travelled 1,000 miles are unrolled, their patterns barely visible in the lamplight but known by heart. Here the tree of life, there the running water pattern that speaks of Oasis dreams. Small brass lamps are lit, their flames flickering like captive stars, casting shadows that dance on the tent walls like the ghosts of all the travellers who have made this journey before. The logistics of such a journey are a form of poetry in themselves, each detail refined over centuries of crossings. Water, more precious than any silk, must be rationed with mathematical precision. The caravan master keeps the accounts in his head. So many days to the next well, so many men, so many animals, so much water per day per life. The calculation must include contingencies. What if the well is dry? What if a sandstorm delays them? What if they must take a longer route to avoid bandits? Each person, each animal, receives their portion measured not by generosity but by careful calculation of need. The water bags, made from whole goat skins turned inside out and sealed with pitch, sweat in the cool night air like living things. They're checked constantly for leaks. A small tear could mean disaster days from the nearest water. The precious liquid is used with reverence, first for drinking, then for cooking, then for the ritual washing before prayers, and finally, if any remains, for cleaning the most essential items. Food for such a journey must be chosen for its ability to survive extremes. Dried fruit that concentrates the sweetness of distant oases into portable nutrition, hard bread that could outlast the journey itself, becoming neither better nor worse with time. Tea compressed into bricks can be shaved off as needed, each shaving releasing the scent of faraway mountains where the leaves were grown, where rain falls regularly, and the idea of desert is just a story told by traders. At the centre of the camp, small fires bloom like orange flowers against the darkness. The fuel is precious here where no trees grow, dried dung from the camels mixed with whatever sparse desert plants can be found. The smoke has a particular scent, not unpleasant once you're used to it, speaking of endurance and adaptation. Around these fires, the real business of the evening begins, the preparation of food, the sharing of tea, and most importantly, the telling of stories. The evening meal is simple but made special by hunger and companionship. Flatbread is warmed on stones placed near the fire, becoming soft and fragrant. Dried meat is stewed with dried fruits, and whatever wild herbs have been found during the day's journey, creating a dish that tastes of survival itself. Tea is prepared with ceremony. The water, so precious, heated to just the right temperature. The tea shaved from its brick with care. The first cup offered to the caravan master is a sign of respect. But it's the sounds of the night camp that weave the deepest magic. As stomachs are filled and tea is passed from hand to hand in small bowls that have seen 1,000 such nights, voices rise in quiet conversation. Languages mix and mingle like the smoke from different fires. Chinese flowing into Sogdian, Persian melting into Turkic, Arabic adding its musical cadences to the mix. These merchants and guides, pilgrims and adventurers, create in their polyglot conversations a temporary babel of understanding, where gestures and goodwill bridge any gaps that words cannot cross. Stories emerge with the stars, tales of sandstorms that turn day to night, walls of sand advancing like solid things, swallowing entire caravans that were never seen again, stories of oases that appeared like miracles just when water ran low, their palm trees visible from impossible distances, their water sweet and cold as mercy itself. Stories of the ghostly cities that shimmer in the heat of midday but vanish when approached, leading unwary travellers astray into the deepest desert where the sand has no memory and the sun no mercy. Each story is a teaching, a way of passing on the hard-won wisdom of the desert. The young traders, on their first or second journey, listen with eyes wide as the star-drunk sky, learning through narrative what no amount of direct instruction could convey. They learn that when the camels refuse to move, a sandstorm is coming. They learn which stars to follow in which season, how the constellations wheel across the desert sky with a reliability that makes them better than any map. They learn the songs that keep spirits up during the hardest parts of the journey, the prayers that have protected travellers for generations, the small rituals that make the difference between survival and disaster. Above it all, the stars of the Gobi hang like a merchant's display of diamonds on black velvet, so bright and numerous that they cast shadows, so clear that nebulae are visible to the naked eye. The Milky Way streams across the sky like a celestial version of the very road the caravan travels, its light a river of stars that seems close enough to touch. In the desert, with no other lights to compete, the stars reveal themselves in their true multitude, and travellers who have never seen such a sky often spend their first desert night simply staring upward, overwhelmed by the universe revealing itself. Navigation by these stars is an art passed from father to son, from master to apprentice, knowing which stars to follow in which season, reading the sky like a map written in light. The North Star, steady and reliable, anchors the whole wheeling display. But the desert navigators know dozens of other markers, the rise of certain constellations that signal the changing seasons, the wandering planets that must be accounted for, the subtle differences in the sky's appearance that tell of weather changes days away. As the night deepens and the camp settles into quieter rhythms, guards are posted, not just against human bandits, but against the wolves that sometimes shadow the caravans, hoping for a sick camel or an unwary traveller. The guards wrap themselves in heavy cloaks against the desert cold that seems impossible after the day's heat, and they walk their rounds with the patience of those who know that vigilance is the price of survival. Their soft footfalls in the sand, the occasional cough or cleared throat become part of the night's music. In the tents, as travellers prepare for sleep, small rituals of comfort unfold. Boots are checked for scorpions. Always check your boots, the desert wisdom says. Sleeping positions are arranged to account for the slight slope of the ground, the direction of the wind, the need to rise quickly if danger threatens. Some travellers sleep with their most precious goods as pillows, silk wrapped in leather becoming the softest and most valuable of cushions. The temperature drops with shocking speed once the sun's warmth leaves the sand. The same travellers who spent the day dreaming of coolness now burrow into their blankets, grateful for every layer. The desert teaches these extremes, burning by day, freezing by night, teaching those who cross it that comfort is always temporary, always something to be grateful for when it comes. As you sink deeper into rest, let the rhythm of the night camp settle into your bones. Feel the vast peace of the desert darkness, where the absence of distraction allows thoughts to settle like sand after wind. The desert teaches patience to all who cross it, patience with the distances that seem to stretch forever, patience with the heat and cold, patience with companions whose quirks become magnified in the intensity of shared hardship. Tomorrow the bells will ring again, the camels will rise with their groaning complaints, and the journey will continue. But for now, in this nocturne moment, all is still, all is peaceful, all is exactly as it should be. Let the starlight guide us now to the Oasis cities, those jewels of life that make the great journey possible. Like jewels strung on an invisible thread across the desert's palm, the Oasis cities of the Silk Road glow with a light that is more than physical. They shine with the luminescence of survival itself, of life persisting where logic says it shouldn't, of human ingenuity married to nature's sparse gifts in a union that creates miracles from mud and water. Dunhuang, Turpan, Nia, Khotan and their sister cities rise from the sand like dreams made solid, their walls catching the first light of dawn like promises kept against all odds. Approach Dunhuang as the caravans do, after days of seeing nothing but sand and sky, and you'll understand why travellers have been known to weep at first sight of its poplars swaying in the distance. The trees appear first as a green smudge on the horizon, wavering in the heat like uncertain hope. Is it real, or another of the desert's cruel tricks? But as you draw closer, that smudge resolves into a reality more wonderful than any mirage. Actual leaves rustling with the sound of life itself, actual shade promising coolness, actual water singing its way through irrigation channels like the voice of salvation itself. The Oasis cities are lanterns in a very real sense, their lights visible from miles away to guide exhausted travellers home. The watchtowers burn signals through the night, steady flames that say, "Here is safety, here is water, here is rest." But they illuminate more than just the physical darkness. They are beacons of civilization, nodes where the web of human connection grows dense and strong, where the single threads of individual journeys weave together into the great tapestry of the Silk Road. In their markets and monasteries, caravanserais and libraries, the real business of the Silk Road takes place, the exchange not just of goods, but of ideas, beliefs, languages and dreams. Watch as a caravan enters through the city gates, the guards checking their cargo with practiced eyes, levying taxes that keep the city's walls strong and its wells clean. The animals are led to stables where fresh hay, impossible luxury, awaits them. The travellers stumble on legs made unsteady by too many days of camel rhythm into bathhouses where hot water, impossible miracle, washes away the desert's grip. In Dunhuang's famous library cave, manuscripts rustle like autumn leaves whenever the door opens, each page a leaf from the tree of knowledge that has grown here at the crossroads of cultures. The cave itself was sealed for 1,000 years, preserving its treasures in the dry desert air that acts like nature's own preservative. Buddhist sutras written in Sanskrit rest beside Manichaean prayers in Sogdian, while Chinese poems share shelf space with astronomical treatises in Persian, medical texts in Tibetan, and commercial contracts in Khotanese. The librarians move through these collections with the reverence of priests tending altars. They understand that they are guardians not just of paper and ink, but of human thought itself, crystallized and made portable. A scholar from Kashmir can sit beside one from Khotan, each reading texts in their own language, occasionally comparing notes through the medium of broken Chinese or gestures that transcend words. Knowledge flows between them like water between vessels, finding its own level. Listen to the sound of monks chanting in the Mogao caves, their voices echoing off walls painted with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, whose eyes seem to follow the light of butter lamps. The caves themselves are like the inside of a mind devoted to contemplation, layer upon layer of images and ideas, each generation adding its own vision to the accumulated wisdom. In one cave, painters work by lamplight, adding new scenes to ancient walls, their brushes moving with the same devotion that created the first images centuries ago. The paintings tell stories that need no words. Here the Buddha achieves enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, his face serene as the desert moon. Their merchants present offerings, their loaded camels painted with such detail you can almost hear their bells. Here celestial musicians play instruments that seem to produce visible music, flowing across the walls in ribbons of colour. The artists use pigments that have travelled the Silk Road themselves, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan creating blues deep as evening sky, malachite from the mountains providing greens fresh as oasis leaves. In Turpin's underground water channels, the Carez system demonstrates a different kind of enlightenment, the practical wisdom of engineers who learn to bring snowmelt from distant mountains through underground channels that lose no precious moisture to the desert sun. These tunnels, dug by hand over generations, stretch for hundreds of miles beneath the desert floor. The water arrives cool and clean, gurgling through the city like laughter, turning dust to gardens, possibility to plenty. Stand at one of the access shafts and peer down into the darkness where water flows like a secret river. The engineering is so precise that the gradient never varies, the water flowing not too fast to erode the channels, not too slow to stagnate. Maintenance crews descend regularly into this underground world, clearing debris, reinforcing walls, ensuring that the city's lifeline continues to flow. Their work is honoured equally with that of scholars and artists, for without water, neither wisdom nor beauty could flourish here. The manuscripts tell their own stories of transformation. Here, a Buddhist text has been translated from Sanskrit to Chinese, the translator adding marginal notes about the difficulty of finding Chinese words for Indian concepts of consciousness. How do you translate Dharma when the receiving language has no equivalent concept? There, a Nestorian Christian prayer has been written in Syriac script but using Turkic words, creating a linguistic hybrid that speaks of communities adapting, evolving, finding ways to make foreign ideas their own. Each oasis city develops its own personality, its own specialties that become famous along the entire road. Khotan guards the secret of jade, working as carefully as China once guarded silk, its artisans creating from hard stone objects as smooth as water, as cool as moonlight. The jade comes from rivers in the nearby mountains, where it has been tumbled by water for millennia until it achieves a smoothness no human polishing could match. The best pieces are said to glow with their own inner light, to ward off evil spirits, to bring good fortune to those who wear them. Kashgar becomes the great junction where the northern and southern Silk Roads reunite. Its bazaars a compression of the entire route into one overwhelmingly rich space. On any given day, you might find Roman glass nestled next to Chinese porcelain, Indian cotton displaying beside Sogdian silk, Baltic amber catching the light next to Persian turquoise. The merchants here speak a dozen languages or more, switching between them like musicians changing instruments, always finding the right tongue for the right customer. But perhaps the most magical aspect of these oasis lanterns is how they create time differently than the desert does. In the sand seas, time is measured in the eternal now of survival. Water, shade, the next step. But in the oases, time expands to allow for contemplation, for art, for the slow fermentation of ideas that need stillness to properly develop. Scholars can spend years translating a single text, ensuring that each nuance crosses the linguistic divide intact. Artists can devote months to a single painted cave, knowing their work will speak to generations yet unborn. The caravanserais deserve their own meditation. These merchant hotels, built around courtyards where fountains play their liquid music, provide more than just shelter. They provide community. The courtyard design, replicated from Anatolia to China, creates a protected space where strangers become temporary neighbours, where the shared experience of the road creates bonds that transcend language and culture. In the evening, when the day's business is done, the caravanserais transform into cultural exchanges. Musicians who've been travelling with different caravans find each other, and impromptu concerts arise, the plucked strings of a Persian tar finding harmony with the bowed notes of a Chinese erhu, the rhythm provided by drums that could be from anywhere, for the beat of music, like the beat of the heart, is universal. Dancers emerge from the shadows, their movements telling stories that everyone understands, of love and loss, journey and return, the eternal human experiences that unite all travellers. The night markets are their own form of magic. As the sun sets and the heat releases its grip, the cities come alive in a different way. Lamps are lit, oil lamps burning with flames steady as meditation, creating pools of golden light that turn every transaction into a scene from a tale. Food vendors appear with delicacies both local and imported, skewers of lamb seasoned with cumin from Persia, dumplings filled with vegetables from oasis gardens, sweets made with sugar that has travelled from India, flavoured with rose water from Damascus. The sounds of the night market create a symphony of commerce, the clink of coins from a dozen realms, the rustle of silk being displayed, the soft thud of spice bags being set on scales, the musical calls of vendors each singing the praises of their wares in their own languages. Children dart between the stalls like fish through coral, their eyes wide with wonder at the abundance, their quick fingers sometimes too quick, earning shouts from merchants who remember their own hungry childhoods. As night deepens, the oasis cities don't sleep. They transform. The temples and monasteries hold midnight services, prayers rising in different languages to different gods, yet all carrying the same human hopes. For safe journey, for profitable trade, for health and happiness, for understanding in a world of infinite complexity. The prayers mingle in the night air like incense smoke, creating an atmosphere of universal sanctity. Let the glow of these oasis lanterns warm us as we prepare to meet the master merchants who made such cities possible, the Sogdians whose very name became synonymous with trade itself. In the great bazaars of Samarkand and Bukhara, where the air itself seems woven from the scent of 1,000 spices, where every breath brings a new combination of fragrances that tell stories of distant lands, the Sogdian merchants reign like conductors of a vast aromatic orchestra. These master traders, whose homeland sits at the very heart of the Silk Road's web like a spider sensing every vibration along its strands, have turned commerce into an art form as refined as any Chinese calligraphy or Persian poetry. Step into a Sogdian bazaar as morning light filters through the wooden lattices overhead, creating patterns on the ground that shift like living calligraphy, and your senses are immediately embraced, no, overwhelmed, by a symphony of scents. Cinnamon from Ceylon whispers its sweet heat, each quill of bark carrying within it the memory of rain-soaked forests and careful harvest. Black pepper from Malabar adds its sharp counterpoint, each peppercorn a tiny fist of flavour waiting to unfold on the tongue. Cardamom pods release their floral secrets when crushed between knowing fingers, the scent rising like incense offered to the gods of commerce. And then there's saffron. Ah, saffron, worth more than its weight in gold, each tiny thread plucked from the heart of a crocus flower by careful fingers, taking thousands of flowers to make a single ounce. Watch the saffron merchant display his wares with the reverence of a priest showing relics. He keeps the precious threads in a box of sandalwood lined with silk, and when he opens it, the assembled merchants lean in like the faithful approaching a shrine. The colour alone is miraculous, not quite gold, not quite red, but something that seems to hold sunlight itself. The Sogdians themselves move through this aromatic landscape with the easy grace of those born to the trade. See that merchant there, his beard henna'd to a distinguished orange, his fingers moving over an abacus with the speed of a musician playing a familiar tune. He's calculating profits in 3 different currencies, while carrying on negotiations in 4 languages, his mind a marketplace where different systems of value meet and merge. Their language, a fluid tongue that borrows from Persian and accepts loans from Chinese, Turkish and Arabic, has become the lingua franca of the Silk Road. When a Chinese merchant needs to speak with an Indian supplier, when a Byzantine trader wants to negotiate with a Tibetan monk, they find their common ground in Sogdian syllables. The language itself has evolved to serve commerce. It has 17 different words for varying qualities of silk, each one precise as a jeweller's scale. Listen to the polyglot whispers that fill the air like steam rising from a pot of brewing tea. In one corner, a Sogdian merchant explains to a Roman agent the subtle differences between various grades of silk, his hands moving over the fabrics like a lover's caress. This one, he says, lifting a piece that seems to float rather than hang, was made from the first silk of the season, when the worms are young and their thread is finest. See how it catches the light? Like moonbeams woven into cloth. The Roman nods, trying to look knowledgeable while calculating how much his patrician clients will pay for moonbeams. In another corner, a group huddles around samples of jade, discussing in hushed tones the mystical properties each culture attributes to the stone. The Chinese merchant speaks of jade's ability to preserve the body after death. The Sogdian translates this into Persian concepts of the eternal soul, while the Indian trader adds his own culture's beliefs about the stone's healing properties. By the time they're done, the jade has accumulated so many miraculous attributes that it seems a bargain at any price. But the Sogdians' greatest innovation isn't in what they trade, but in how they trade. Watch as a merchant produces not gold or silver, but a piece of paper, a credit note that represents wealth without weight, value without volume. This revolution in commerce, born from the practical needs of traders who couldn't carry enough precious metal for their transactions, transforms the very nature of wealth. A merchant can now deposit gold in Samarkand and withdraw its equivalent in Chang'an, the paper in between as light as silk and as powerful as an imperial seal. The system requires something more valuable than gold: trust. And the Sogdians have spent generations building trust like master architects building a cathedral, each transaction a stone in the edifice of their reputation. A Sogdian's word on the quality of goods or the safety of a route is accepted from Byzantium to Beijing. Break that trust once, and the news travels faster than the swiftest horse, carried on the invisible network of merchant gossip that spans continents. The honey-sweet diplomacy of the Sogdians deserves its own appreciation. They are masters of the soft word, the diplomatic gift, the gesture that honours while it negotiates. See how that merchant pours tea for a difficult customer, the stream of liquid catching the light as it arcs from pot to cup. The ceremony of serving creates a moment of shared humanity that transcends commercial interest. The tea itself is perfectly chosen, not the finest, which might seem like showing off, nor the poorest, which would be an insult, but something in between that says, we are equals here, sharing warmth. By the time the tea is finished, the deal is often done, both parties feeling they've gained not just in goods but in understanding. The Sogdian has learned that his customer's daughter is getting married and needs silk for her wedding dress. Suddenly, the negotiation becomes not about maximum profit, but about being part of a celebration. The customer has learned that the merchant's son is studying to be a translator. Perhaps there's a manuscript in his possession that might help the boy's education. Commerce becomes community. Their caravanserais are architectural embodiments of this diplomatic spirit. Built around courtyards where fountains play their liquid music day and night, these merchant hotels provide neutral ground where competitors can become temporary allies against the shared challenges of the road. The sound of water is carefully calculated, loud enough to create privacy for negotiations, soft enough to soothe travel-frayed nerves. At night, when the day's trading is done, merchants gather in these courtyards to share stories and songs, each culture's music adding its voice to an impromptu concert that no single tradition could produce alone. A Sogdian might begin with a love song from his homeland, his voice carrying the melancholy of all travellers far from home. A Turkish merchant adds a rhythm on a drum made from camel skin, the beat speaking of endless steppes and freedom. A Chinese trader produces a flute, its notes like silk made audible, weaving through the other sounds and binding them together. The Sogdians also carry something more subtle than spices or silk. They carry information, the most valuable commodity of all. They know which passes are clear of snow, which rulers have changed their tariff policies, which cities are suffering from plague, which new goods are creating demand. This information flows through their networks like blood through veins, keeping the whole body of the Eurasian trade alive and healthy. Watch a Sogdian merchant preparing for a journey. His preparations go far beyond loading camels and hiring guards. He visits other merchants, collecting letters to be delivered, messages to be passed, small gifts that will smooth his way. He's not just a trader, he's a mailman, a diplomat, a news service, and a cultural ambassador all rolled into one. The letters he carries might include a proposal of marriage between merchant families, news of a death that needs to reach distant relatives, or scholarly correspondence between monks who have never met but share an interest in translating certain texts. The spices themselves seem to sing their origins as they're weighed and wrapped. Nutmeg hums of the Banda Island's volcanic soil, where trees grow in the shadow of smoking mountains. Cloves click like castanets with memories of Zanzibar's shores, where the harvest happens by moonlight to preserve the essential oils. Ginger warms the air with tales of monsoon-fed roots, speaking of soil made rich by centuries of rain and decay and rebirth. Each spice requires different handling, different storage, different care. Peppercorns must be kept dry or they'll lose their fire. Cinnamon needs to breathe or it becomes bitter. Saffron must be protected from light lest its colour fade. The Sogdian merchants know these needs like parents know their children's preferences, adjusting storage, changing wrappings, monitoring constantly to ensure that what arrives at the destination is as perfect as what left the source. The financial innovations continue to evolve. The Sogdians develop not just credit notes but letters of introduction, insurance policies, and even primitive futures contracts. A merchant can now buy next year's silk harvest at this year's prices, betting on his ability to predict demand. Another can insure his caravan against bandits, paying a premium to spread the risk among many traders. The mathematics of commerce becomes as complex as astronomy, and young Sogdians study accounting with the same intensity that Chinese students study for civil service exams. In the evening, as the bazaar begins to close, there's a ritual as old as trade itself. The merchants gather their day's takings, but before the gold and silver are locked away, there's the matter of charity. The Sogdians, whether Buddhist, Zoroastrian, Manichaean, or following the newer faith of Islam, all understand that wealth brings obligation. A portion of each day's profit goes to the poor, to the maintenance of the caravanserais, to the schools where future merchants learn their letters and numbers. This charity isn't just altruism, it's practical wisdom. A city where the poor are fed is a city less likely to experience the unrest that disrupts trade. A caravanserai in good repair attracts more merchants. Schools produce the literate workers that complex commerce requires. The Sogdians understand that they're not just building individual wealth, but creating the conditions for wealth to flourish. As the stars emerge over Samarkand and Bukhara, as the last negotiations wind down and the final cups of tea are drained, the Sogdian merchants perform their evening prayers, each to their own god, but all thankful for another day of peaceful trade, another day when goods and ideas flowed freely, another day added to the centuries of commerce that have made their cities jewels in the crown of the Silk Road. Let the mingled scents of the bazaar linger in your mind as we follow a single bolt of silk on the final leg of its journey to the marble halls of Rome where it will meet its destiny. In the marble coolness of a Roman senator's villa, as Mediterranean sun filters through gauze curtains, creating patterns of light and shadow that dance across mosaic floors, a moment of contact occurs between two worlds that barely know each other's names. The senator's wife, Claudia, lifts from its wrappings a length of silk so fine it seems to be woven from spiders' dreams and morning mist, from the very essence of lightness given form. Her fingers, accustomed to the finest linens Egypt can produce, to wools so soft they rival clouds, tremble slightly as they encounter this impossible softness that makes all other fabric seem coarse as sackcloth. Watch her face transform as the silk flows through her hands like water given form, like solidified light, like everything wool and linen could never be. Her eyes widen, her lips part in a small gasp of wonder, and for a moment she looks not like a Roman matron hardened by politics and position, but like a young girl encountering magic. She doesn't know that this fabric began its existence as the patient labour of caterpillars in far Cathay, doesn't know about the mulberry groves where women rise before dawn to tend their precious worms, doesn't know about the workshops where steam rises like incense while cocoons give up their silken secrets. She knows only that she has never felt anything like this against her skin, never seen fabric that seems to glow with its own inner light, never imagined that cloth could be both strong and delicate, warm and cool, substantial and ethereal all at once. The silk has travelled 10,000 miles to reach this moment, passing through more hands than there are stars visible in Rome's light-polluted sky. From the Chinese merchants who first sold it, understanding its value in the weight of gold and jade it would bring, to the Sogdian traders who carried it across the terrible beauties of the Taklamakan desert, where sand sings and mirages promise false salvation. From the Persian intermediaries who added their own markup and stories, weaving tales of the silk's origins that grew more fantastic with each telling, to the Arab sailors who brought it the final distance across seas the colour of lapis lazuli, where dolphins played in the wake of ships heavy with the treasures of the East. At each stage of its journey, the silk has accumulated value like a pearl accumulating layers of nacre. What cost a month's wages in Chang'an now costs a year's income in Rome. The senator has paid for this single bolt of fabric what would buy a small farm in the countryside, complete with slaves, livestock, and equipment. Yet as his wife drapes it around her shoulders, her expression suggests it was worth every aureus, every denarius, every last copperas. "Feel this, Marcus," she breathes, extending the fabric toward her husband. The senator, who's maintained his gravitas through civil wars and political purges, who has stood unmoved while kingdoms rose and fell, reaches out with fingers that shake slightly. The silk slides across his palm like a whisper made tangible, and his stoic mask slips for just a moment, revealing wonder as pure as a child's. The Romans call it Sericum from Ceres, their name for the mysterious people of the Far East who produce this miracle. In their imagination, the Ceres are a race of giants who comb silk from trees, or perhaps a people who harvest it from special flowers that bloom only under certain phases of the moon. Some natural philosophers propose that silk is actually the hair of sea creatures, dried and woven by the seers who live at the edge of the world where the sun rises. Others suggest it's made from the down of exotic birds that live only in the highest mountains of the east, birds that can never be captured, only persuaded to give up their feathers willingly. The reality, patient silkworms munching mulberry leaves, would seem too mundane to produce such magic. And perhaps that's wisdom, for sometimes the truth is less important than the mystery, and the silk carries within its fibres not just the reality of its making, but all the dreams and imaginings of those who have touched it on its long journey west. See how silk transforms Roman society like a slow, luxurious revolution. In the Senate, traditionalists grumble about the decadence of men wearing silk togas, the fabric so light it seems indecent, revealing the shape of the body beneath in ways that good Roman wool never would. They speak of the days when Romans wore homespun, when virtue was measured in the coarseness of one's clothing, when men were men and didn't need Eastern luxuries to prove their worth. But even as they complain, their wives are visiting the silk merchants, and soon enough the same senators who spoke against silk in public are wearing it in private, justifying it as necessary for their health. Doesn't silk prevent the aches and pains of age? Isn't it a medicine as much as a fabric? And if a man must wear it for his health, well, who can argue with the necessities of nature? The Roman ladies discover that silk takes dye like no other fabric, achieving colours that make their traditional garments look dull as dust, as lifeless as stones. Tyrian purple, already worth its weight in silver, becomes transcendent when applied to silk. The fabric seems to capture light and release it slowly, like a sunset extending itself through the hours of a banquet. Women appear at festivities wrapped in silk stolas that shift colour as they move, creating effects that poets struggle to capture in words. "She moved like Aurora herself," writes one besotted poet, wrapped in the very essence of dawn, colours shifting from rose to gold to the pale blue of morning sky. The gods themselves must weep that they didn't think to dress themselves thus. The hyperbole of poets becomes simple truth when applied to silk. The fabric seems to demand excessive language to make the impossible possible. The economic impact ripples through the empire like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Gold flows eastward in a stream that worries imperial accountants who watch the treasury diminish while Roman ladies shimmer. Pliny the Elder will write with alarm about how the empire's wealth drains away to pay for silk and spices, calculating that Rome sends 100 million sesterces eastward each year. He doesn't understand that this flow of precious metal is creating the world's first truly global economy, that Roman coins are becoming an international currency, trusted from Britain to Bengal. Roman coins begin appearing in Indian ports, where merchants test them with their teeth and nod approval at the purity of the gold. They show up in Chinese treasuries, where officials puzzle over the strange faces on the coins. Who is this man with the laurel crown? Why does he look so stern? The coins are melted down and recast, but some are kept as curiosities, conversation pieces that speak of a world beyond the Middle Kingdom. In the workshops of Roman dressmakers, new techniques must be developed to work with silk. The fabric is so fine that traditional Roman needles tear it, so new needles must be made thin as hairs and sharp as whispers. The thread used to sew silk must be silk itself. Nothing else is fine enough, strong enough, worthy enough. Seamstresses who have worked with wool and linen all their lives must retrain their fingers, learn a lighter touch, develop an almost mystical sensitivity to the fabric's needs. The fashion revolution extends beyond mere clothing. Silk cushions appear in dining rooms, making the traditional Roman practice of reclining while eating infinitely more comfortable. Silk hangings divide rooms, creating spaces that can be transformed with the pull of a cord. Silk screens filter harsh sunlight, creating an ambiance of soft luxury that makes Roman houses feel like Eastern palaces. But silk brings more than fashion to Rome. It brings questions that challenge Roman understanding of the world. How can fabric be so light yet so strong? Roman soldiers, always practical, begin to wonder if silk might have military applications. Could it stop an arrow? Could it be worn under armour to prevent chafing? Experiments are conducted with mixed results that nonetheless open new avenues of thought about protection and comfort. Natural philosophers debate whether silk is animal, vegetable, or mineral in origin. Some propose it's a fusion of all three, created by mysterious Eastern alchemy that combines the essence of plant, animal, and earth in ways Roman science cannot yet comprehend. Others suggest it is woven from the discarded wings of exotic insects, or perhaps the filtered essence of clouds caught at sunrise and sunset. The arrival of silk also brings changes in Roman ideas about the East. The Seres, who were once imagined as barbarians at the edge of the world, must be reconsidered. Any people who can produce such beauty, such refinement, cannot be simple savages. Roman intellectuals begin to speculate about Eastern philosophy, Eastern knowledge, Eastern ways of understanding the world that might complement Roman practicality with something more ethereal. In the stillness of the evening, as Roman ladies prepare for sleep, they carefully fold their silk garments, treating them with the reverence due to objects that have travelled half the world to reach them. The fabric whispers as it moves, a sound like distant wind through unknown trees, carrying within its fibres the essence of its journey. Desert heat and mountain cold, the sweat of camels and the songs of caravaneers, the patience of borders crossed and storms weathered. Claudia places her silk stola in a cedar chest, the wood scent mingling with the faint fragrance that silk seems to carry. Something indefinable, perhaps just imagination, but speaking of far places and different airs. Tomorrow she will wear it to a banquet at the Emperor's palace, where she will move through marble halls like a whisper of the East, where other women will touch her sleeve with envious fingers and ask where, how much. And she will smile, mysterious as the East itself, and speak of merchants whose names she can't pronounce, of cities she can't imagine, of a road that stretches beyond the horizon of Roman knowledge. She's become, without knowing it, part of the Silk Road herself, a link in the chain of desire and satisfaction that connects the mulberry groves of China to the 7 hills of Rome. As you sink deeper into rest, feel how silk becomes a metaphor for connection itself, how something so light can carry such weight of meaning, how something so soft can be strong enough to bind distant civilizations together. The janitor's wife, preparing for sleep in her Roman villa, and the Chinese silk worker, rising for the dawn shift in her workshop, will never meet, will never know each other's names. Yet they are connected by threads stronger than any silk, the threads of human desire for beauty, for comfort, for wonder, for something that transcends the ordinary and touches the divine. Let the whisper of silk against marble guide us eastward again, toward the paths where not just goods but beliefs began to travel, where the road became a highway for the human spirit itself, along the dusty paths of the Silk Road, where merchants carry bolts of silk and bags of precious stones, where every traveller's pack contains the weight of profit and possibility. Something infinitely more valuable travels without weight, without taking up space in any saddlebag. The teachings of the Buddha, spreading like seeds on the wind, taking root wherever they find receptive soil, transforming landscapes of the spirit as surely as irrigation transforms the desert. Picture a Buddhist monk at the edge of the Taklamakan desert, his saffron robes faded by sun, and journey to the colour of autumn leaves, the colour of transformation itself. His name is Dharmaraksha, though he will be known by different names in different languages as he travels. Fahu in Chinese, Dhammarakita in Pali, each translation an attempt to capture the essence of protected by the Dharma. He carries no goods to trade, no gold to spend, only a few precious scrolls wrapped in silk and the words of the Dharma memorized like a map of the inner world. Each sutra, a pathway through the wilderness of human suffering. His footsteps follow the same paths as the merchant caravans, but his destination is not a marketplace. It's the human heart, wherever it might be found, in whatever language it might listen, under whatever sky it might seek solace. He knows that suffering is universal, that the merchant worried about bandits and the king worried about succession share the same fundamental anxieties, that the Dharma speaks to prince and pauper alike. The Buddhism that travels the Silk Road is already a religion transformed by its journey from India. Like a river that picks up the colours of every soil it passes through, the Dharma has absorbed elements from the cultures it has touched, becoming richer, more complex, more capable of speaking to diverse hearts. In Gandhara, where Alexander's Greeks once walked and left their aesthetic legacy, Buddha statues begin to show the flowing robes and naturalistic poses of Hellenistic art. The face of enlightenment takes on new features while keeping its essential serenity. Greek proportions married to Indian spirituality, creating something entirely new. Listen to the quiet establishments of monasteries rising like lotus blooms in desert ponds. In Khotan, in Kucha, in Turfan, communities of monks create islands of contemplation amid the bustle of trade. The sound of construction is constant but gentle. The tap of hammers, the scrape of trowels, the murmur of prayers that consecrate each brick laid. These monasteries become far more than religious centres. They are hospitals for sick travellers who arrive fevered from desert crossings, schools for local children who learn letters along with sutras, libraries where texts are translated with the patience of eternity itself. In the scriptoriums, monk scholars work by lamplight, their brushes moving across paper in meditation made visible. The work of translation is a spiritual practice in itself, each character chosen with the care of someone selecting jewels for a crown. They translate Sanskrit sutras into Chinese, but the work is far more complex than simply substituting words. How do you translate nirvana for minds that have never conceived of existence as suffering? How do you explain karma in a language that thinks of fate differently? How do you convey the concept of emptiness to a culture that values substance? The translator sits with his dictionary spread before him like maps of meaning. He's been working on a single paragraph for 3 days now, trying to capture in Chinese characters something that Sanskrit expresses in a single word. He tries one combination, reads it aloud, shakes his head. The meaning is close but not exact, like a painting of a flower that captures its form but misses its fragrance. He dips his brush again, tries another approach. Around him, other monks work on their own translations. One is creating a commentary, explaining Indian cultural references for Chinese readers who have never seen a monkey or a mango, never experienced the monsoon that features so prominently in Buddhist imagery. Another is adapting Buddhist tales, changing details to make them resonate with local understanding. The Bodhi tree becomes a mulberry, the lotus becomes a peony, yet the essential teaching remains unchanged. The cave temples carved into cliffsides become three-dimensional prayers, entire cosmologies made visible in stone and paint. At Bamiyan, giant Buddhas emerge from living rock, their faces serene as they watch over the valley where caravans rest. The sculptors work for years, generations even, fathers passing their tools to sons, the work becoming a family dharma practice. Each chip of stone removed is done with mindfulness, each detail carved with devotion. Inside smaller caves, painters create pure lands on walls, paradises where the awakened dwell, where every flower blooms eternally, where music plays without instruments, where the very air confers wisdom. The paintings serve as meditation aids for illiterate travellers who cannot read the sutras but can lose themselves in visual contemplation. A merchant, exhausted from his journey, sits before a painting of Amitabha's Western Paradise and finds peace washing over him like cool water. The Buddhist message adapts brilliantly to the needs of Silk Road travellers. The concept of merit-making through donation resonates with merchants who understand investment and return, building a well for travellers, contributing to a monastery's upkeep, commissioning a statue or painting. All these become ways to ensure not just better rebirth, but safer journeys in this life. The monks are careful to emphasize that the Dharma doesn't oppose wealth, only attachment to wealth. A rich merchant who uses his fortune wisely, who treats his workers fairly, who contributes to the community's well-being, accumulates merit as surely as any ascetic. Buddhism also brings practical benefits that smooth its acceptance. Buddhist monasteries become the first international banking network, holding deposits for merchants who can withdraw funds at distant locations using sealed letters. They provide medical care, having preserved and translated Indian medical texts that offer treatments unknown in Central Asia. They run schools where merchants' children learn not just religious texts but mathematics, languages, and the geography needed for trade. The monks themselves become inadvertent traders, though what they trade has no material form. They carry stories, Jataka tales of the Buddha's previous lives that entertain around campfires while teaching moral lessons. They carry meditation techniques that help travellers deal with the psychological stresses of long journeys. They carry astronomical knowledge that helps with navigation, mathematical concepts that improve accounting, artistic techniques that revolutionize local crafts. Watch as a monk teaches meditation to a group of caravan guards. These rough men, more comfortable with swords than sutras, sit awkwardly in attempted lotus positions. The monk doesn't force foreign postures on them. Sit however you're comfortable, he says gently. The Buddha found enlightenment sitting, but he could have found it standing or walking. The posture is less important than the mind. He teaches them to focus on their breath but relates it to their work. When you're watching for bandits in the night, you must be alert but calm, aware but not tense. Meditation is the same watchfulness, but turned inward. The guards understand this. They know the state he describes, the relaxed alertness that can be maintained for hours. Now they're learning to achieve it without external threat, to find that clarity and safety as well as danger. The artistic revolution that Buddhism brings transforms the visual landscape of the Silk Road. Before, art was primarily decorative or commemorative. Now it becomes didactic, devotional, a means of spiritual transmission. The Greek-influenced Gandhara style meets Chinese linear traditions, Persian love of colour, and Indian symbolic complexity. The result is an international Buddhist art style that speaks to viewers regardless of their cultural background. In the painting workshops, apprentices learn to grind pigments while chanting mantras, making the preparation of materials a spiritual practice. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan is ground for the Buddha's hair, the deep blue representing the infinite space of enlightenment. Malachite provides the green of growing things, of life perpetually renewed. Gold leaf, beaten so thin it floats on breath, halos the enlightened ones. The materials themselves become teachings, the transformation of rough stone into luminous colour paralleling the transformation of human consciousness. The influence flows both ways. As Buddhism travels the Silk Road, it's changed by the journey. Central Asian Buddhism develops unique characteristics, more emphasis on light imagery, reflecting the harsh desert sun. More focus on Maitreya, the future Buddha who offers hope to travellers uncertain of surviving their journeys. More integration with local deities who are reimagined as protectors of the Dharma rather than competitors to it. Let the sound of evening prayers fade into the desert wind as we prepare to discover how the Silk Road carried treasures in both directions, how the East received as much as it gave. The Silk Road's greatest secret, whispered among merchants like a prayer and hidden from casual observers like a precious stone, is that silk was never the only treasure flowing along these ancient paths. Like a great river that carries silt from many sources, the trade routes moved goods in all directions, creating currents and countercurrents of desire that connected the world in an intricate web of want and satisfaction. Let us follow a piece of jade eastward, against the common assumption that all treasures flowed from China. This particular stone, the colour of spring leaves with veins of white running through it like frozen streams, was pulled from the rivers of Khotan by a diver who held his breath until his lungs burned, who knew by touch alone which stones were common river rocks and which held that special density, that particular coolness that marked true jade. In the workshops of Khotan, master craftsmen examine the stone with the same intensity that a poet brings to choosing words. They see in its depths possibilities invisible to untrained eyes. Here a dragon might emerge, there a phoenix, perhaps a simple bee disc that will carry more meaning in its perfect circularity than any elaborate carving. The master runs his fingers over the stone, feeling for flaws, sensing the grain, understanding how the jade wants to be shaped. The working of jade is unlike any other stonecraft. It cannot be chipped like flint or carved like marble. Instead, it must be worn away, particle by particle, using abrasives and infinite patience. The workshop fills with the steady grinding sound that has echoed here for centuries, a meditation in itself. Apprentices learn that hurrying ruins jade, push too hard and it cracks along hidden fault lines, revealing that what seemed solid contained fragility all along. Watch as the master works using bamboo drills tipped with sand to hollow out sections, employing leather wheels charged with crushed garnet to polish surfaces to mirror brightness. The work takes months, sometimes years for elaborate pieces. A single jade cup might represent more labour than building a house, more concentrated attention than copying a 1,000-page manuscript. When finished, the jade piece begins its eastward journey, moving against the tide of silk flowing west. It passes through the same caravanserais, the same oasis towns, but its destination is China itself, where jade is valued above gold, above silver, above all precious things save perhaps life itself. The Chinese believe jade contains the essence of heaven and earth in balance, that it can preserve the body after death, that wearing it brings virtue to the wearer as if goodness could seep through the skin. But jade is only one thread in this eastward flow. Follow now a shipment of Roman glass, created in the workshops of Syria, where glassmakers have perfected techniques unknown in the East. The glass is coloured with minerals that create hues impossible to achieve with Chinese ceramic glazes, a blue as deep as the Mediterranean, a green like spring forests, a purple that captures the essence of Tyrian dye in solid form. the glassmakers of Rome have learned to blow glass into shapes that seem impossible. Vessels so thin they ring like bells when tapped, bottles that capture light and hold it, windows that let in illumination while keeping out wind. But it's the decorative pieces that travel the Silk Road. Glass beads that look like captured rainbows, vessels with gold leaf trapped between layers, creating an effect of floating metal that mesmerizes Eastern eyes. In Chang'an, these glass pieces are received with the same wonder that Romans show for silk. The emperor's collection includes glass vessels displayed alongside ancient bronzes and fresh jade, each piece representing different mastery over matter. Chinese craftsmen study the Roman glass, trying to understand its secrets. They heat their own materials to higher temperatures, experiment with different sands, but the exact techniques remain elusive, ensuring that Roman glass maintains its value through scarcity. And then there are the horses. The horses of Fergana. These are not the sturdy small horses of the Chinese steppes, bred for endurance and the ability to survive on sparse grass. These are the horses that Zhang first reported, the heavenly horses that sweat blood, actually a harmless parasite that creates the illusion of bleeding, that run like the wind itself has taken equine form. Picture the horse markets of Fergana, where these magnificent animals are displayed like living sculptures. They stand taller than Chinese horses, with legs that seem too delicate for their bodies, until you see them run, and understand that those legs are springs coiled with power. Their coats shine like polished metal, gold, copper, silver, bronze, and their eyes hold an intelligence that borders on the uncanny. The Chinese emperor becomes obsessed with acquiring these horses, understanding that they represent more than transportation or status. They represent military advantage. Cavalry mounted on such horses could outmaneuver any enemy. They represent divine favor. Surely heaven has blessed the land that produces such creatures. They represent possibility itself. If horses can be so improved, what else might be transformed through contact with the Western lands? The trade in horses is complex beyond any silk transaction. Horses must be fed, watered, rested. They fall sick, go lame, die in the desert crossings. A caravan carrying silk might lose a fraction of its value to bandits or weather. A horse caravan might arrive with half its precious cargo dead. Yet the profits for successful delivery are so enormous that traders continue to brave the risks. Special facilities develop along the route, horse stations where sick animals can recover, where expert veterinarians, often Buddhist monks who see healing animals as merit-making, practice the medical knowledge of India, Persia and China combined. These stations become centres for breeding experiments, trying to combine the hardiness of local horses with the speed and beauty of the Fergana breed. The flow of goods eastward also includes more exotic items. Coral from the Mediterranean, red as blood and believed by the Chinese to have protective properties, travels in carefully wrapped bundles. Baltic amber, containing insects from forests the Chinese cannot imagine, becomes prized for both beauty and supposed medical properties. Frankincense and myrrh from Arabia, used in Chinese temples alongside local incenses, creating new aromatic combinations for prayer. Perhaps most surprisingly, the West sends ideas eastward encoded in objects. Roman architectural techniques travel not as blueprints, but as actual building materials, special cements that harden underwater, precisely cut stone blocks that demonstrate new masonry methods. A Roman arch, disassembled and shipped east, is reconstructed in Luoyang, where Chinese architects study its distribution of forces, adapting the principle to their own architectural vocabulary. Musical instruments make the journey, carrying their cultural context within their forms. A Persian Santa arrives in China and evolves into the Yang Qin. A Roman hydraulis, water organ, appears in the Chinese court, where its mechanical ingenuity inspires new approaches to automation. Each instrument brings not just new sounds, but new ways of thinking about sound, new mathematical ratios, new aesthetic possibilities. Even plants travel eastward. Grapevines from the Mediterranean, carefully transported with soil from their homeland, are planted in Chinese gardens. At first they struggle, but gradually adapt to new conditions. Chinese winemaking begins, creating beverages that taste nothing like their Western predecessors, but represent a fusion of Eastern and Western agricultural knowledge. The eastward flow creates its own economy. Sogdian merchants who made fortunes carrying silk west established new routes carrying Western goods east. They learn which Roman goods appeal to Chinese tastes, which Persian crafts find ready markets in Luoyang. They become cultural translators, explaining to Roman glassmakers that Chinese prefer certain shapes, telling Persian weavers that specific patterns resonate with Confucian aesthetics. This bidirectional flow transforms both ends of the route. Rome begins to appreciate Eastern aesthetics, the subtle rather than the ornate, the suggested rather than the explicit. China begins to value Western directness, the bold colours of glass, the anatomical accuracy of Hellenistic sculpture, the harmonic clarity of Western music. As you drift deeper into rest, consider how this exchange of treasures mirrors all human relationships. We give and receive, each exchange transforming both parties. The jade that travels east carries with it the patience of its makers, just as the glass travelling alongside it holds the breath of its creators. The horses carry not just riders but dreams of speed and freedom. Every object is a message, every trade a conversation between cultures too distant to speak directly, but finding common language in beauty, utility and wonder. Let the rhythm of hoofbeats fade into the distance as we prepare to explore the golden age when the Silk Road reached its greatest glory. In the morning markets of Chang'an during the height of the Tang dynasty, when the empire stretches from the shores of the Pacific to the edges of Persia, when poetry is valued as highly as gold and music flows through the streets like water, the Silk Road reaches its golden apotheosis. This is a city of 1 million souls, the largest in the world, where all the threads of the great trade network come together in a tapestry of such richness that visitors often weep at first sight of its grandeur. Picture the Western market as dawn breaks, painting the sky in shades of peach and gold that the court painters will try to capture on silk. The market covers acres, a city within the city, its streets laid out in a grid that speaks of imperial order imposed on commercial chaos. But as the sun rises and the merchants arrive, that order gives way to a beautiful pandemonium that represents the world in miniature. Here comes a caravan just arrived from Samarkand, the camels still dusty from their journey, their bells announcing treasure from the west. The merchants haven't even had time to wash the desert from their faces, but already buyers cluster around them, eager to see what wonders have survived the journey. Bolts of silk are unloaded, but not Chinese silk going west. This is Byzantine silk coming east, purple as only Constantinople can produce, embroidered with golden eagles that seem ready to take flight. In the next street, pomegranates from Persia pile in pyramids of ruby red, their leathery skins hiding jewelled seeds that burst with tart sweetness. A merchant cuts one open for customers to sample, the juice running down his fingers like liquid garnets. These pomegranates have travelled 2,000 miles, each one wrapped in straw, transported in baskets that allow air to circulate, kept at just the right temperature to arrive neither too green nor overripe. The sound of the market is its own form of music. Listen to the auctioneer's rhythmic chant as he sells horses, not just any horses, but the latest shipment from Fergana, their coats gleaming like molten metal in the morning light. His voice rises and falls with practiced precision, creating excitement, building tension until the final bid lands like a drumbeat and the horse has a new owner who will parade it through the city's boulevards like a living jewel. Nearby, the sound of the oud mingles with the Chinese pipa as musicians who have met only this morning discover that their instruments speak compatible languages. A crowd gathers, clapping rhythms that belong to no single tradition but emerge from the moment's joy. Someone produces a drum, another a flute, and suddenly there's a concert happening in the spice market, the music mixing with the scent of cardamom and cinnamon to create a synesthesia of sensation. Paper money flutters in the morning breeze like rectangular butterflies. The Tang dynasty has revolutionized commerce by creating currency that represents value without weight. A merchant can carry a fortune in paper that would require a dozen camels if converted to silver. The paper itself is a work of art, made from mulberry bark, printed with wood blocks so intricate they're impossible to counterfeit, signed with seals that glow red as fresh blood. Watch a transaction between a Chinese silk merchant and an Arab trader. They speak no common language, but numbers are universal, and both understand the hand signals that have developed over centuries of trade. Fingers flash, indicating price, quantity, quality. The Arab produces a balance scale no bigger than his palm, its brass gleaming with the patina of constant use. Tiny weights, some no larger than seeds, are added and removed until both parties nod satisfaction. The goods being traded tell stories of the entire known world. Here's sandalwood from India, its scent released with every cut, filling the air with fragrance that the Buddhist monks claim aids meditation. There's lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, ground to powder that will become the blue in paintings of heaven. Rock sugar from India, white as snow and sweet as love, waits in ceramic jars that have travelled almost as far as their contents. But the Tang capital offers more than just goods. It offers experiences impossible anywhere else on Earth. In the entertainment quarter, Persian dancers perform to Indian drums, while Turkic singers provide vocals in a style that borrows from Chinese opera. The audience includes everyone from Korean diplomats to Arab merchants, from Tibetan monks to Byzantine ambassadors, each finding something familiar yet thrillingly foreign in the performance. The restaurants of Chang'an deserve their own meditation. Here, cuisines from across the known world blend and transform. A Sogdian chef prepares lamb with Chinese techniques, creating dishes that exist nowhere else. Indian spices meet Chinese vegetables in combinations that would horrify purists from either culture, but delight the cosmopolitan palates of Tang diners. Fermented mare's milk from the steppes is served alongside grape wine from newly established Chinese vineyards, each drink carrying its cultural heritage in every sip. In the Buddhist temples, international communities of monks create libraries that are museums of human thought. Sutras in Sanskrit sit beside commentaries in Chinese, while Tibetan texts share shelves with Central Asian manuscripts in scripts that few can read. The monks work constantly on translations, each text rendered into multiple languages, creating a web of meaning that spans continents. The temple workshops are equally international. Here, Indian techniques for casting bronze meet Chinese methods for working jade. Persian designs influence Chinese textiles. Byzantine mosaics inspire new approaches to inlay work. The artisans learn from each other with the eager humility of those who understand that mastery has many forms. The imperial palace itself becomes a showcase of Silk Road treasures. The emperor's collection includes automata from Byzantium, mechanical birds that sing, water clocks that mark the hours with moving figures. There are mirrors of polished steel from India that show true images without the distortions of bronze. Glass windows from Rome filter light into colours that dance across floors inlaid with stones from every corner of the empire. In the imperial workshops, the finest craftsmen of the age work on projects that blend traditions. A throne is created that combines Chinese woodworking, Persian metalwork, Indian ivory carving, and Central Asian felt making. It takes 3 years to complete and represents not just furniture but a physical manifestation of the Tang dynasty's role as the centre of the civilized world. The city's poets find inspiration in this international atmosphere. Libai writes of Western dancing girls and foreign wine, of music that makes him homesick for places he's never been. Du Fu composes verses about the mingling of peoples, the way trade creates understanding, how sharing food leads to sharing hearts. Wang Wei paints landscapes that show Chinese mountains through eyes influenced by Persian miniatures, creating a style entirely new. Even the city's crime reflects its international character. The police records speak of Byzantine coin counterfeiters, Sogdian smugglers hiding pearls in hollow walking sticks, Indian con artists selling fake remedies made from common herbs disguised as rare medicines. The magistrates must learn the laws and customs of a dozen cultures to fairly adjudicate disputes between merchants from different lands. As night falls on Chang'an, the western market doesn't close, it transforms. Lanterns are lit, thousands of them, turning the streets into rivers of light. The evening crowd is different from the morning one, more pleasure seekers than serious traders. Wine shops open their doors, music floats from upper windows, and the scent of evening meals being prepared in 100 different traditions creates an olfactory map of the known world. In one corner, a storyteller holds his audience spellbound with tales of Western dragons different from Chinese ones. Dragons that hoard gold rather than bringing rain, that must be slain rather than venerated. His listeners, raised on Chinese dragon lore, shake their heads at these strange Western ideas but lean in closer, eager to hear more about these alien ways of understanding the world. As the golden lanterns of Chang'an fade into memory, let us venture into the deep desert where the Silk Road faces its greatest challenge. Under a moon as round and white as a perfect pearl, the caravan prepares to cross the Taklamakan desert, that sea of sand whose very name whispers warnings in the local tongue. Go in and never come out. This is where the Silk Road faces its greatest test, where the earth itself seems to rebel against the human desire to connect and trade, where every mile must be won through careful planning, iron determination, and not a small amount of luck. The caravan master gathers his charges in the last oasis before the crossing. His face, weathered by 40 years of desert winds, carries the map of every difficult crossing etched in its lines. He speaks slowly, carefully, knowing that what he says now might mean the difference between life and death in the days ahead. The desert is not cruel, he says, his voice carrying the wisdom of hard-won experience. It simply is. It doesn't care about our schedules, our profits, our dreams. Respect it, and it might let you pass. Disrespect it, and it will swallow you without malice or memory. The preparation is meticulous. Water bags are checked and rechecked, their seams tested, their contents calculated down to the last cup. Each camel will carry its maximum load, but that load must be balanced between water for survival and goods for profit. Too much water, and the journey yields no gain. Too little, and there is no journey, only bones whitening in the sun. The caravan includes a special member, a guide from the Taklamakan's edge peoples who knows the desert's moods like a farmer knows weather. He reads signs invisible to others, the way sand forms ripples that indicate prevailing winds, the colour of the sky that warns of approaching storms, the behaviour of the few hardy insects that somehow survive here. His knowledge has been passed down through generations, each guide adding observations to the accumulated wisdom. They set out in the pre-dawn darkness, when the desert briefly forgets its cruelty and allows gentle travel. The moon, 3 days past full, provides enough light to navigate by, but not so much as to wash out the stars that serve as celestial map. The sand is cool beneath the camel's feet, firm enough to provide good purchase. For these few hours the crossing seems possible, even pleasant. But as the sun rises, the desert shows its true nature. The heat doesn't arrive gradually. It attacks, sudden and overwhelming as a physical blow. The air shimmers, turning the horizon into a wavering uncertainty, where dunes become mountains, where patches of darker sand become lakes that vanish as you approach. These mirages are the desert's cruelest joke, showing water to the thirsty, cities to the lost, hope to the desperate. The sand itself becomes an enemy. What was firm at dawn turns treacherous by noon, soft as flour, swallowing feet, making each step an effort. The camels know to spread their broad pads, to find the rhythm that carries them forward without exhaustion. But the humans struggle, their narrower feet sinking, their energy depleted with every laborious step. And then there's the singing. The Taklamakan sands sing, a phenomenon that still puzzles scientists but which every desert traveller knows. As the wind moves over the dunes, the sand grains rub together in ways that produce sound. Sometimes a low moan like distant thunder, sometimes a high whistle like flutes played by spirits, occasionally a roar like an approaching army. The guide listens carefully to these sand songs, reading in them messages about weather and terrain that others miss. The psychological challenges match the physical ones. The desert's vastness can break minds as surely as its heat breaks bodies. Travellers report seeing impossible things, cities floating upside down in the sky, caravans of ghosts passing in the opposite direction, dead relatives beckoning from just beyond the next dune. The experienced travellers know to ignore these visions, to keep their eyes on the camel in front of them, to trust in the reality of rope and leather rather than the fantasies of heat-stressed minds. At night, when the temperature plummets with shocking speed, the caravan makes camp with practiced efficiency. The tents are arranged in a circle, protection against the wolves that sometimes follow caravans, hoping for weakness. Fires are lit sparingly. Fuel is precious here where nothing grows. The flames are more for morale than warmth, a defiant human gesture against the overwhelming darkness. Stories emerge around these fires, tales of the desert's mysteries. The guide speaks of the lost cities buried beneath the sand, settlements that thrived when rivers flowed here before the climate changed and the water disappeared. Sometimes, he says, the wind uncovers these places, revealing walls and streets, pottery and bones, all preserved by the dry air. But the same wind that reveals also conceals, and by morning the city is gone again, reburied for perhaps another 1,000 years. They speak of Lulon, once a thriving kingdom on the Silk Road, now a collection of ruins slowly being devoured by sand. The mummies found there, preserved so perfectly that their tattoos are still visible, their clothes still colourful, seem to sleep rather than lie dead. What catastrophe ended their civilization? The desert keeps its secrets, revealing only tantalizing glimpses. The survival techniques passed down through generations are shared like precious gifts. How to find water by watching where birds fly at dawn, how to predict sandstorms by the behaviour of camels, who sense barometric changes humans miss. How to navigate when sandstorms obliterate all landmarks, using the feel of the wind and the slope of the ground. How to stay sane when the desert whispers lies, and shows visions of water that doesn't exist. On the third night, under that Taklamakan moon now waning but still bright, disaster nearly strikes. A young trader, driven mad by thirst and heat, breaks away from the caravan, running toward a mirage he swears is an oasis. Others restrain him, tie him to a camel until the madness passes. In the morning he remembers nothing, but the incident serves as a warning. The desert has claimed one mind temporarily. It could easily claim bodies permanently. The water situation grows critical. The guide's calculations were precise, but the crossing has taken longer than expected due to a sandstorm that forced them to shelter for half a day. Rations are cut, then cut again. Lips crack, tongues swell, thoughts become thick as the blood that moves sluggishly through dehydrated veins. Yet still they continue, because stopping means certain death while moving offers at least the hope of water. On the 5th day, salvation appears not as a mirage but as reality, a line of green on the horizon that doesn't waver, doesn't vanish. The camels smell water long before humans can see the oasis, and their pace quickens. The younger animals must be restrained from running, which would waste precious energy. Step by step, the green grows larger, resolves into trees, into buildings, into life itself. The arrival at the oasis is always emotional. Hardened traders weep as they drink their first full draught of water in days. Some pray, offering thanks to whatever gods they believe in. Others simply sit in the shade, letting their bodies remember what it feels like not to be assaulted by sun and sand. The local people, accustomed to such arrivals, provide food and medical care with the matter-of-fact kindness of those who understand that next time it might be them needing help. That night, safe in the oasis, the caravan celebrates their survival with the quiet joy of those who have looked death in the face and lived. The moon, now clearly waning, seems less bright than it did in the deep desert, diminished by lamplight and the presence of water. But everyone who crossed the Taklamakan under its light will remember it forever, that pearl moon that lit their way through hell and saw them safely to the other side. As you rest in your comfortable bed, far from the threats of the desert, let the image of that moon remind you that humans have always faced impossible challenges and found ways through. The Taklamakan tried to stop the Silk Road with its vastness and hostility, but human determination, accumulated wisdom, and mutual support proved stronger than sand and heat and distance. Let the desert moon guide us now to the scholars and pilgrims who carried more than trade goods across these perilous paths. Along the Silk Road, between the merchants with their loads of profit and the soldiers with their weapons of war, move figures driven by different desires entirely. The pilgrims and scholars whose treasure is knowledge, whose currency is wisdom, whose destination is understanding itself. They travel the same routes, face the same dangers, but their journals speak of inner landscapes as vast as any desert, of spiritual mountains as challenging as any physical peak. Consider the monk Faxian setting out from Chang'an in the year 399, when he is already past 60, an age when most men are content to sit by fires and tell stories of their youth. But Faxian burns with a different fire, the need to find authentic Buddhist texts, to travel to the source of the Dharma in India, to bring back scriptures that will illuminate the Chinese understanding of the Buddha's teaching. His journey begins with careful preparation of a different sort than the merchants undertake. Where they count coins and calculate profits, Faxian prepares his mind through meditation, strengthens his resolve through fasting, purifies his intention through prayer. He knows the physical journey will test him, but it's the spiritual challenges he prepares for most carefully. The doubt that whispers in desert nights, the temptation to turn back when hardship mounts, the ego that might corrupt his purpose if he succeeds. He travels with a small group of fellow monks, each carrying little more than their robes, their begging bowls, and their unshakable faith. They depend on the kindness of strangers, on the Buddhist communities along the route who shelter pilgrims, on the universal respect for holy men that transcends cultural boundaries. When they join merchant caravans for safety, they pay their way with prayers, with medical knowledge, with a simple presence of holiness that many believe protects travellers from misfortune. The journal Faxian keeps speaks of wonders both physical and spiritual. In Khotan, he he marvels at a Buddhist procession where monks carry images of the Buddha on wheeled platforms, where flower petals fall like snow, where the entire city becomes a mandala of devotion. He describes the sound of 10,000 voices chanting in unison, creating vibrations he can feel in his chest, as if the very air has become solid with prayer. But he also records the hardships with unflinching honesty. In the Taklamakan, where even hardened merchants fear to tread, his companion dies of thirst just hours before they reach water. Qian performs the funeral rites with sand instead of water, with prayers that crack through lips split by dehydration. He carries his friend's begging bowl the rest of the journey, a reminder that the path to enlightenment is paved with sacrifice. 2 centuries later, another scholar pilgrim named Zhang will follow similar paths but with imperial support that Qian never enjoyed. Where Qian travelled as a beggar, Zhang moves like a prince of wisdom, with letters of introduction from the Tang Emperor, with guards and guides and gold for expenses. Yet his internal journey proves just as challenging, his commitment to truth just as absolute. Xuanzang's great contribution isn't just the text he brings back, 657 Sanskrit works that will take decades to translate, but his meticulous record of the lands he passes through. His Great Tang Records on the Western regions becomes a geographical and cultural encyclopedia, describing not just routes and distances, but the beliefs, customs, foods, and languages of every place he visits. He writes with the precision of a scientist and the wonder of a poet, creating a document that will guide travellers for centuries. Watch him in Nalanda, the great Buddhist university of India, where thousands of monks study everything from logic to medicine, from astronomy to grammar. Xuanzang doesn't just collect texts, he studies, debates, questions. He spends years here, his Chinese mind wrestling with Indian concepts, finding ways to build bridges between different ways of understanding reality. The debates in the courtyards of Nalanda ring with multiple languages as scholars from across Asia test their understanding against each other, sharpening their wisdom through intellectual combat as rigorous as any physical training. But pilgrims carry more than Buddhist texts. Nestorian Christians travel the Silk Road carrying their own scriptures, their own understanding of the divine translated into Syriac, Persian, Chinese. They establish churches in Chang'an where services are conducted in languages that blend like incense smoke, where Christ is described using Buddhist terminology to make the foreign faith comprehensible to Chinese minds. Jewish merchants, who are also scholars, carry Torah scrolls wrapped in silk, protecting their sacred texts with the same care given to the most valuable trade goods. In Kaifeng, they establish a community that will preserve Hebrew learning in China for 1,000 years, creating illuminated manuscripts that blend Jewish iconography with Chinese artistic techniques, producing objects of beauty that belong fully to neither tradition yet speak eloquently of both. Islamic scholars begin appearing on the Silk Road as that faith spreads from Arabia. They bring not just the Quran, but also mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, medical knowledge. In the translation houses of Baghdad and later Bukhara, Greek texts preserved by Byzantine scholars are translated into Arabic, then carried east where they're translated again into Persian and Chinese, each translation adding commentary, each culture contributing its own understanding. The scholars create their own economy along the Silk Road. A rare manuscript can be worth more than silk, especially if it contains practical knowledge, medical remedies, astronomical calculations for navigation, mathematical techniques for engineering. Monasteries and madrasas compete to acquire important texts, sending their best scholars on years-long journeys to find and copy works rumoured to exist in distant libraries. The physical act of copying becomes a spiritual practice. In Buddhist monasteries, copying sutras is considered merit-making, each character written with mindfulness, each page completed with dedication prayers. The Chinese developed printing, first woodblock, later movable type, partly to multiply sacred texts, making wisdom available to more people. But hand copying continues, valued for the meditative focus it requires, the intimate relationship it creates between copier and text. Watch a scriptorium where multiple translations happen simultaneously. A Sogdian scholar reads aloud from a Persian medical text. A Chinese scribe writes down a phonetic version of the Persian, while another creates a translation based on the Sogdian's explanations. An Indian physician in residence adds commentary based on Ayurvedic principles. A Greek-speaking Byzantine trader suggests comparisons with Galen. The final document is a palimpsest of knowledge, each layer adding depth and complexity. The Pilgrims also carry songs and stories, those texts written in memory rather than on paper. Buddhist Jataka tales travel from India, transforming along the way. The animals change to match local fauna. The settings shift from jungle to desert to mountain, but the moral teachings remain constant. These stories cross religious boundaries too. A Buddhist tale of sacrifice becomes a Christian parable of charity. A Zoroastrian myth of light and darkness influences Islamic mystical poetry. Music notation presents special challenges. Different cultures write music differently. Some use symbols for pitch, others for hand positions on instruments, still others rely entirely on oral transmission. The scholars develop hybrid systems, creating ways to preserve melodies that cross cultural boundaries. A Persian song learned in Samarkand can be reconstructed in Beijing, though it will sound different played on Chinese instruments with Chinese aesthetic preferences. The scientific knowledge that travels with scholars transforms practical life along the Silk Road. Indian numerals, what we call Arabic numerals, revolutionize accounting, making complex calculations possible without elaborate counting boards. Persian windmill designs are adapted for grinding grain in areas where water power isn't available. Chinese compass technology spreads westward, making navigation more precise. Each innovation builds on previous knowledge, creating an accumulation of practical wisdom that benefits all. Medical knowledge proves especially valuable. The scholars carry not just theoretical text but practical experience. They've treated altitude sickness in the mountains, dehydration in the deserts, strange fevers in foreign cities. They combine remedies from different traditions, Chinese herbs, Indian surgery techniques, Greek diagnostic methods, Islamic pharmaceutical preparations. The medical texts they create are practical manuals for survival on the Silk Road, encyclopedias of human ailments and their various cultural cures. Some scholars travel to preserve knowledge they fear is disappearing. As empires rise and fall, as cities are conquered and libraries burned, far-sighted individuals undertake desperate journeys to save texts. They hide manuscripts in caves, bury them in jars, carry them to safety in remote monasteries. The Dunhuang Library Cave, sealed for 1,000 years, represents one such attempt to preserve wisdom against the chaos of history. The relationships between pilgrims and merchants create unexpected synergies. Merchants fund monastery construction in exchange for prayers for safe journeys. Pilgrims carry commercial letters along with religious texts, their holy status protecting the correspondence from interference. Merchant caravans time their departures to coincide with pilgrim groups, believing that travelling with holy men brings divine protection. As you drift towards sleep, consider how these pilgrims and scholars created an invisible Silk Road overlaying the physical one, a network of ideas and beliefs that connected minds across impossible distances. Every text translated, every song taught, every medical technique shared strengthened this web of knowledge. They proved that the human hunger for understanding is as powerful as the desire for profit. that wisdom can travel as far as any silk, that the mind's journeys can be as transformative as any physical pilgrimage. Let the whispered prayers of 1,000 traditions guide us forward to a time when the Silk Road would know its greatest expansion under unexpected conquerors. In the year when horses' hooves thundered across continents like drums announcing a new age, when the sons and grandsons of Genghis Khan ruled from sunrise to sunset, the Silk Road experienced a transformation as complete as any metamorphosis in nature. What had been a network of paths became a superhighway. What had been dangerous became relatively safe. What had been the province of brave merchants became almost routine. This was the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, and despite being created by warriors feared across the known world, it brought to the Silk Road its golden age of connectivity. Picture Ogedei Khan, son of Genghis, standing in his new capital of Karakoram, looking at maps that show his empire stretching from Poland to the Pacific. He understands what his father began to grasp, that conquest is only the beginning, that real power comes from connection, from the ability to move goods, people, and ideas across vast distances with speed and safety. Under his command, the Silk Road transforms from a collection of local routes into a unified system as carefully organized as any modern transportation network. The Mongols bring to the Silk Road something it had always lacked: unified administration. Where before each city-state, each kingdom, each tribal territory had its own rules, taxes and currencies, now a single system operates from the Mediterranean to the China Sea. The YAM, or postal relay system, stretches across the empire like a nervous system, with stations every 25 to 30 miles where riders can change horses, where urgent messages can cross continents in weeks rather than months. Watch a messenger carrying the golden paisa, a passport that bears the Khan's seal. This small tablet grants him absolute authority, fresh horses at every station, food and lodging at any establishment, safe passage through any checkpoint. The message he carries might be a trade agreement, a diplomatic communication, or intelligence about distant rebellions. The speed of communication allows the Mongol Empire to function as a coherent whole despite its impossible size. The safety the Mongols provide is brutal but effective. Bandits who for generations had preyed on caravans find themselves hunted with the same ruthless efficiency the Mongols brought to warfare. The punishment for robbing a merchant is death, not just for the robber but often for his entire clan. It's harsh justice, but it works. For the first time in history, a merchant can travel from Venice to Beijing with reasonable confidence of arriving with his goods and his life intact. The Mongols themselves, despite their fearsome reputation, prove to be curious and tolerant rulers. They follow their traditional shamanistic beliefs, but protect and even patronize Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and every other faith that travels the Silk Road. In their courts, debates are held between scholars of different religions, with the Khan listening with genuine interest to arguments about the nature of divinity, the purpose of existence, the proper way to live. This religious tolerance creates an unprecedented flowering of interfaith dialogue. In Karakoram, Nestorian Christians build churches next to Buddhist temples. Islamic mosques rise beside Taoist shrines. The sound of different prayers at different times creates a clockwork of devotion. Buddhist drums at dawn, Islamic calls at noon, Christian bells at evening. Rather than conflict, this proximity breeds a kind of practical ecumenism. Neighbours help each other repair roofs regardless of which god is worshipped beneath them. The Mongol appetite for foreign expertise transforms the Silk Road into a highway of human talent. Chinese engineers travel west to build siege engines, bringing with them knowledge of gunpowder that will eventually transform warfare worldwide. Persian administrators head east to help govern the Chinese portions of the empire. Their skills in taxation and record-keeping invaluable to rulers more comfortable on horseback than behind desks. European craftsmen, captured during Western campaigns but then treated as valuable resources rather than slaves, find themselves in Mongol courts creating everything from jewellery to maps. The ortak, or merchant associations, flourish under Mongol protection. These cooperatives pool resources, share risks, and create the medieval equivalent of multinational corporations. An ortak might have members from a dozen different cultures, its contracts written in multiple scripts, its profits divided according to complex agreements that account for different levels of risk and contribution. The Mongols not only protect these associations but invest in them, understanding that prosperous merchants mean prosperous tax revenues. In the caravanserais, the mixture of peoples reaches new heights of cosmopolitanism. On any given evening, you might find Rus fur traders drinking with Mamluk spice merchants, Korean Buddhist monks debating with Sufi mystics, Venetian glassmakers demonstrating their craft to Chinese porcelain artists. The Mongol rules are simple: no fighting, no cheating, no disrespect to any religion or culture. Within those broad parameters, anything is possible. The technology transfer under the Mongols accelerates to unprecedented levels. The Mongols themselves, with no strong craft traditions of their own, become eager adopters and adapters of every innovation they encounter. They take Chinese printing and spread it westward, Persian irrigation and carry it eastward, European metalworking and apply it to their own weapons. They're not just conquerors, but collectors of techniques, of knowledge, of anything that might make their empire stronger or life better. Medical knowledge, in particular, travels freely under Mongol rule. When plague strikes one part of the empire, doctors from unaffected regions are summoned to help. Chinese physicians teach Persian doctors about acupuncture and moxibustion. Islamic surgeons demonstrate advanced techniques to European barber surgeons. Indian Ayurvedic practitioners share their vast pharmacopoeia. The Mongol court produces medical encyclopedias that combine knowledge from every tradition, creating treatment protocols that draw on the best of global wisdom. The Mongol princesses who marry into various royal houses become unexpected ambassadors of culture. Educated, powerful, often managing vast estates, they bring with them not just Mongol customs, but the cosmopolitan knowledge of the Mongol court. A princess raised in Karakoram might speak 6 languages, understand the basics of Buddhist philosophy, Islamic law, and Confucian ethics, know how to calculate using both Chinese abacuses and Arabic numerals. Their courts become miniature versions of the Mongol cultural mixing bowl. Marco Polo's journey, which we'll explore in detail soon, would have been impossible without the Mongol peace. His family travels not as explorers braving the unknown, but as merchants following established routes carrying Mongol passports, staying in Mongol-protected caravanserais. What seems like extraordinary adventure to European readers is, by Mongol-era Silk Road standards, almost routine travel, safe, predictable, profitable. But the Mongol peace carries its shadows. The same efficiency that speeds goods and ideas also speeds disease. The plague that will devastate Europe in the next century travels the Silk Road as surely as any merchant, carried by fleas on rats that feed on grain in caravans. The Mongol postal system that carries messages so quickly also carries military intelligence that enables swift, brutal suppressions of revolts. The roads that bring silk and spice can also bring armies. The Mongol rulers understand this duality. They create laws attempting to limit the spread of disease, requiring sick travellers to quarantine, burning the belongings of plague victims. They try to balance the free flow of commerce with security needs, creating the medieval equivalent of customs inspections. But they're fighting forces beyond their understanding. Microscopic enemies more deadly than any army, economic pressures that no amount of force can control. Still, for a century and a half, the Mongol peace creates conditions of travel and trade that won't be matched again until the modern era. A letter written in London can reach Beijing in 4 months. A fashion trend starting in Persia can reach France within a year. Ideas cross continents at the speed of horses, creating the first true world culture, limited, elite, but real. As you rest in the safety of your bed, free from the fears that plagued pre-Mongol travellers, consider how the most unlikely people, nomadic warriors with no cities of their own, created the conditions for the greatest flourishing of urban commercial culture the world had yet seen. They proved that connection is more powerful than separation, that protecting trade is more profitable than raiding it, that the movement of ideas can build empires more lasting than any conquest. Let the thunder of Mongol horses fade into the scratching of a Venetian merchant's pen as we meet the most famous traveller of the Silk Road. In a Genoese prison cell where Mediterranean dampness seeps through stone walls and the smell of the sea mingles with less pleasant odours, 2 men huddle close to a single candle's light. One speaks in a voice hoarse with memory and wonder, the other writes with the frantic energy of someone trying to capture smoke in his hands. The speaker is Marco Polo, returned from 24 years in the East with his head full of wonders. The scribe is Rustichello of Pisa, a writer of romances who recognises that the truth Marco tells is stranger than any fiction he could devise. Tell them about the desert of Lop, Marco whispers, his eyes focusing on something far beyond the prison walls. Tell them how the sands sing warnings to travellers, how voices call your name in the night, trying to lure you from the path. Tell them how we stuffed our ears with cloth and tied ourselves to our camels, trusting the beast's instincts over our own senses. The year is 1298, but Marco's mind lives in the 1270s, when he was young and the world was impossibly vast and full of promise. See him as he was then, 17 years old, standing with his father and uncle before the palace of Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis who rules an empire that encompasses most of the known world. The Polos have made this journey before, but for young Marco, everything is painted with the bright colours of first experience. The Great Khan takes a liking to this young Venetian, who shows none of the fear that makes most foreign visitors tremble. Perhaps he sees in Marco's eager eyes a reflection of his own curiosity about the world beyond his borders. Perhaps he simply enjoys having someone new to whom he can display the wonders of his realm. Whatever the reason, Marco finds himself not just tolerated but welcomed. Not just a visitor, but eventually a trusted agent of the Khan. For 17 years, Marco serves the Khan, travelling on imperial business to parts of the empire that few foreigners ever see. His passport bears the Khan's seal, opening every door, smoothing every path. He learns to speak Mongolian, Persian, and various Chinese dialects. He adapts to local customs with the flexibility of the young, eating foods that would horrify his Venetian relatives, participating in rituals that Father Church would condemn, seeing with eyes increasingly freed from European prejudices. In the prison cell, Rustichello struggles to keep up as Marco's memories tumble out like silk spilling from an overpacked chest. The bridges of Kinsay, Marco murmurs, using the Persian name for Hangzhou. 3,000 of them, each one arched high enough for ships to pass beneath. The canals are roads of water, busier than any street in Venice. The markets stretch for miles, selling everything from live fish swimming in tanks to printed books cheaper than bread. Marco's account is not that of a scholar or a pilgrim, but of a merchant's son with a merchant's eye for detail. He notes prices, customs duties, local products. He describes the paper money of the Khan with the wonder of someone raised with heavy gold and silver coins. They take the inner bark of mulberry trees, he explains, and make from it sheets that they cut to various sizes. The Great Khan's seal makes these worth whatever he declares, A piece of bark becomes as valuable as gold because the Khan says it is so, and who dares disagree? But it's the human details that make Marco's account live and breathe. He tells of the Khan's birthday celebration, where 20,000 guests dress in robes of the same colour, creating a sea of coordinated silk that ripples with every movement. He describes the Khan's hunting expeditions, tent cities that move across the steppes, with leopards and hawks trained to hunt, with portable palaces that can be assembled in hours, with kitchens that feed thousands without missing a single meal. Tell them about the women of Tibet, Marco says, and even in the dimness Rustichello can see him blush. Marco describes, with the delicacy required for a Christian audience, customs of hospitality that involve offering wives and daughters to honoured guests. I speak only of what I observed, he insists, not that is, a man must respect local customs but need not participate in all of them. The Venice that Marco left as a teenager has shrunk in his memory, become quaint and provincial compared to the cities of the East. He struggles to find comparisons his readers will understand. Kinsey is to Venice as Venice is to a fishing village, he says, then shakes his head, knowing the inadequacy of the comparison. How can he convey the scale of a city with 1 million inhabitants to people who think 100,000 makes a metropolis? His route along the Silk Road reads like a litany of wonders, through Persia, where fire springs from the ground and burns perpetually, petroleum seeps that the locals have learned to collect and burn, across Afghanistan, where rubies the size of eggs are mined from mountains so high that fires won't properly burn at their peaks, through the Pamirs, where wild sheep with horns 6 palms in length leap across crevasses that would swallow a palace. The cold in those mountains, Marco whispers, his body shivering with remembered chill despite the relatively mild prison temperature. We wrapped ourselves in every piece of clothing we owned, and still the cold found ways through. Men's beards became ice, breath froze in the air and fell tinkling to the ground. We thought we would die, but the local guides just laughed and said this was mild weather. In the Taklamakan desert, Marco's caravan faces the singing sands he mentioned earlier, but he also tells of the preparation, how they carried water in whole sheepskins turned inside out and sealed with pitch, how they navigated by stars when sandstorms erased all landmarks, how they learned to read the desert's moods by the colour of the sky at dawn. The desert teaches patience, he says. In Venice, we're always hurrying. In the desert, hurrying means death. The Oasis cities appear in his narrative like jewels on a necklace. Kashgar with its Sunday market where every language on earth seems to be spoken. Khotan where jade is fished from rivers and silk production rivals China's. Dunhuang with its cave temples that Marco, good Christian though he claims to be, admits moved him to tears with their beauty. But it's China proper that dominates Marco's memories. The Grand Canal, that river made by human hands, carrying more traffic than the Mediterranean. The city of Quanzhou, where ships from Java and India and Africa crowd the harbour so thickly you can walk from deck to deck for a mile. The porcelain factories where earth is transformed into vessels so fine that light passes through them, decorated with colours that seem painted with crushed jewels. They have a drink made from rice, Marco tells Rustichello, that they serve hot in porcelain cups. It tastes like bitter wine but clears the head wonderfully, and their tea leaves steeped in hot water. At first I thought it mere coloured water, but it refreshes like nothing else. I fear I'll never taste it again. His voice carries genuine sorrow for this small loss among so many greater ones. Marco describes coal, black stones that burn, with the wonder of someone who has only known wood fires. He tells of asbestos cloth that won't burn, of eyeglasses that help the elderly read, of gunpowder used not just for war but for celebrations that paint the night sky with coloured fire. Each innovation is recorded with the meticulous attention of someone who knows he might be the only witness his countrymen will ever have to these wonders. The Khan's postal system particularly impresses the merchant's son. Messages travel faster than seems possible, he marvels. The riders change horses at stations maintained at the Khan's expense. A message can cross the empire in weeks. In Europe, the same distance would take months if the message arrived at all. As dawn light begins to filter through the prison's barred window, Marco's energy flags. He's been talking all night, and Rusticello's hand is cramped from writing. But there's urgency in Marco's voice. He knows that people don't believe him, that they call him Il Milione for his supposed million lies. He needs someone, anyone, to understand that the world is larger, stranger, more wonderful than Venetian imaginations can conceive. Tell them, he says, grasping Rusticello's sleeve. Tell them that everything I've said is true, and that I haven't told the half of what I saw. Tell them the world is wide and full of marvels, that the Khan's lands hold wisdom we haven't dreamed of, that there are peoples and customs and ideas that would transform our understanding if we could only open our minds to them. Rusticello nods, gathering his pages covered with frantic notes. He'll transform these murmured memories into a book that will be copied and recopied, translated and retranslated, believed and doubted in equal measure. Il Milione, the travels of Marco Polo, will inspire Columbus to seek Cathay by sailing west, will guide merchants for centuries, will plant in European minds the seeds of global thinking. As you drift towards sleep, let Marco's wonder at the wide world remind you that the familiar is not the only way, that the known is just a small corner of the possible. His prison cell couldn't contain his memories. Let your imagination be equally unbounded. The Silk Road he travelled with his body continues to exist for any mind willing to journey beyond the comfortable and known. Let the scratching of Rusticello's pen fade into the creaking of ships' timbers as we explore how the Silk Road took to the seas, when the monsoon winds shift in the Indian Ocean, turning from northeast to southwest with the reliability of a cosmic clock. Ships that have waited in harbours from Hormuz to Malacca begin their dance with wind and water. This Silk Road, that river of connection that flowed across deserts and mountains, here becomes truly liquid, spreading across the waters in vessels that carry not just silk and spices, but the continued dreams of connection between distant shores. Picture the harbour of Quanzhou during the Song dynasty, when this port city handles more shipping than all of Europe combined. The masts cluster so thickly they seem like a forest that has learned to float, their sails furled like sleeping birds. Ships from Java nestle against vessels from Ceylon. Persian dhows share moorings with Chinese junks, and in the linguistic babble of the docks, a dozen languages blend into the universal tongue of commerce. The Chinese junks deserve their own meditation. These are not the simple vessels that ply the Mediterranean, but floating cities, some with a dozen masts, multiple decks, and watertight compartments that won't be invented in Europe for another 5 centuries. Watch as one prepares for departure, the hull painted with eyes to see its way through treacherous waters, the hold packed with porcelain nested in straw, with tea compressed into bricks, with silk wound on bolts that will survive salt spray and tropical humidity. The captain consults his charts, not crude approximations, but detailed maps showing depths, currents, seasonal wind patterns. Chinese navigation has reached levels of sophistication that include magnetic compasses floating in oil, star charts adjusted for latitude, and detailed logs of previous voyages that note everything from the colour of the water to the types of birds that indicate nearby land. This is navigation as science, refined over centuries of trading voyages. But the real magic happens when the ship leaves the harbour and catches the monsoon wind. These seasonal winds are as reliable as the Silk Road's desert routes, but infinitely more powerful. A ship that might take months to row or sail against contrary winds can, with the monsoon's assistance, cross from China to India in weeks. The entire maritime trading system of Asia revolves around these winds, with merchants timing their activities to match the monsoon's schedule. The sea route offers advantages the land route cannot match. A single large junk can carry as much cargo as 1,000 camels, and without the need for constant feeding and watering. The sea doesn't demand the passage fees that every Oasis city extracts, doesn't hide bandits behind every dune. Pirates exist, certainly, but a well-armed merchant ship with its complement of crossbowmen and small cannon can defend itself in ways a caravan cannot. Yet the sea has its own dangers. Storms can scatter a fleet in hours, sending ships to the bottom with all their cargo and crew. The doldrums can trap a vessel for weeks in air so still that sails hang like funeral shrouds. Reefs lurk beneath tropical waters, ready to tear the bottom from any ship whose navigator has miscalculated. And there are diseases. Scurvy for those who don't understand the need for fresh fruit, tropical fevers that can kill a crew faster than any pirate attack. The ports along the maritime Silk Road become melting pots that make even cosmopolitan Samarkand seem provincial. In Malacca, the narrow strait that all traffic between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea must pass through, a saying develops. The Gujaratis understand accounts, the Chinese understand ships, the Javanese understand magic, and the Malays understand the sea. Each group brings its expertise, creating a synthesis of maritime knowledge. Watch a pepper transaction in one of these ports. The pepper has been grown in the highlands of Sumatra, harvested by farmers who've tended these vines for generations. It's been carried to the coast by riverboat, sold to middlemen who understand the international market, graded by experts who can tell by smell and taste exactly which estate produced it and in what year. Now it's being loaded into a ship bound for China, where it will flavour the food of emperors, or perhaps continue on to Europe where it's worth its weight in silver. The maritime route transforms not just what is traded, but how it's traded. Credit systems become even more sophisticated when dealing with sea voyages. A merchant in Cairo can invest in a voyage to China that won't return for 2 years, if it returns at all. Insurance systems develop, not the formal contracts of later centuries, but informal agreements where risk is spread among multiple investors. If the ship returns safely, all profit. If it's lost, no single merchant is ruined. The human cargo of these ships tells stories as rich as any silk. There are the Nakudas, the ship captains who know every port from Basra to Canton, who speak enough of every language to negotiate but claim no single homeland. Their loyalty is to their ships and crews, their religion is the successful completion of voyages, their nationality is the sea itself. Buddhist monks travel by sea, finding it faster if less spiritually instructive than the overland route. They adapt their practices to shipboard life, meditation while the deck rolls beneath them, prayers timed to the watches rather than temple bells. Some monks become ship's chaplains, offering spiritual services to crews that might include Hindus, Muslims, Christians and Confucians, all on the same vessel. The spread of Islam along the maritime routes happens not by sword but by trade. Muslim merchants, with their international networks and reputation for honest dealing, become preferred partners. They bring not just goods, but mosques, schools, and a legal system that facilitates international trade. Within centuries, the entire Indonesian archipelago will adopt Islam, not through conquest, but through the slow, patient work of merchants who prove that faith and profit can sail in the same ship. The goods carried by sea expand beyond traditional Silk Road commodities. Cloves from the Spice Islands, worth more than gold in European markets. Sandalwood from Timor, destined to perfume Chinese temples. Birds of paradise from New Guinea. their feathers so extraordinary that Europeans will believe they have no feet and spend their entire lives flying. Each product carries stories, myths, and misunderstandings that add to its value. The technology of the sea route influences the land route and vice versa. Navigational techniques developed for desert crossings adapt to ocean voyages. The credit systems created for camel caravans work equally well for ship cargoes. Even the social structures replicate. The captain of a ship holds similar authority to a caravan master. The crew members parallel camel drivers. The sailing master equals the desert guide. As the night deepens around you, imagine yourself on one of these trading vessels, rocked by swells that have travelled thousands of miles to lift and lower your floating world. The stars above are the same ones that guided land caravans, but here they reflect in water that stretches to every horizon. The silk in the hold below whispers against its wrappings with each roll of the ship, a sound like prayers in an unknown tongue. The maritime Silk Road proves that human connections will find a way, whether across desert or ocean, whether by camel or sail. Water, which seems like a barrier, becomes a highway. Monsoons, which seem like obstacles, become allies. The sea route doesn't replace the land route but complements it, creating a web of connections that encircle the globe long before anyone imagines the Earth as a sphere that can be circumnavigated. Let the sound of waves fade into the whisper of silk as we explore how the road carried more than goods, how it carried the invisible cargo of disease and ideas that would transform the world. Along the Silk Road, invisible travellers journey alongside the merchants and their goods, passengers so small they escape notice, yet so powerful they can bring empires to their knees. These are the microbes, the diseases that recognise no borders, respect no authority, and transform human history as surely as any conqueror or prophet. But travelling with them, as if in cosmic balance, come ideas encoded in paper, that simple technology that democratizes knowledge and ensures that wisdom can outlive any plague. The year is 1347, and in a Genoese trading post on the Black Sea, something terrible stirs. The Mongol army besieging the city has been struck by a disease that kills with horrifying efficiency: fever, swellings in the groin, and armpits that turn black with blood, death often within days. In an act of biological warfare centuries before the term exists, the Mongols catapult infected corpses over the city walls. The Genoese flee by ship, but they carry with them passengers they cannot see. Fleas infected with Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes bubonic plague. Follow the path of these ships as they stop at Constantinople, at ports in Greece, at Sicily, at Marseille. At each port, some of the invisible passengers disembark, finding new hosts, beginning new chains of transmission. Within 3 years, a third of Europe's population will be dead, and the Black Death will have earned its place as one of history's greatest catastrophes. But here's the crucial point. This plague didn't originate in the Black Sea. It travelled there along the Silk Road, following the same routes that carried silk and spices, using the same caravanserais, the same ships, the same human networks that connected the world. The Silk Road had always carried diseases. Smallpox travelled from India to China to Europe, leaving trails of death but also, eventually, immunity in populations that survived. Measles made similar journeys. The close contact between humans and animals in caravans, the camels, horses, donkeys and the rats that fed on spilled grain, created perfect conditions for diseases to jump species and spread. But let's speak of a different kind of transmission, one that builds rather than destroys. In the same years that plague travels the Silk Road, so does paper, that invention that seems so simple yet changes everything it touches. Watch a paper maker in Samarkand, where the technology arrived from China after the Battle of Talas in 751, when captured Chinese artisans revealed their secrets. The process seems like alchemy. Old rags, fishing nets, hemp rope, anything with plant fibres are collected and sorted. They're beaten into pulp, mixed with water, until the solution is thin as milk. Then comes the magic. A screen is dipped into the vat and lifted, allowing water to drain while fibres mat together. What emerges is a sheet of possibility, thin, light, capable of accepting ink, yet strong enough to survive travel across continents. Before paper, knowledge was trapped in expensive, heavy materials. Parchment required the skins of entire herds. Papyrus was fragile and couldn't survive diverse climates. Clay tablets were durable but impossibly heavy for long-distance transport. Silk could be written on but was too valuable. Paper changes everything. Suddenly a merchant can carry a library in his saddlebags. A scholar can make multiple copies of important texts. A poet can afford to revise and discard drafts. The paper mills of Samarkand improve on Chinese techniques. They discover that adding cotton fibres makes paper stronger, that certain tree barks create better writing surfaces. They develop papers for different purposes, thin for letters, thick for official documents, treated with minerals for resistance to insects and moisture. Each improvement spreads along the Silk Road, carried by the paper makers themselves who travel to establish new mills. Watch how paper transforms the Silk Road's intellectual life. In Baghdad's House of Wisdom, scholars who once jealously guarded single copies of ancient texts now commission multiple copies. A treatise on mathematics can exist simultaneously in Damascus, Cairo, and Cordoba. Errors in copying are caught by comparing versions. Knowledge becomes harder to destroy. When the Mongols burn one library, copies of its books survive in others. Paper democratizes literacy in ways that would have been impossible with expensive writing materials. Merchants keep detailed records not on costly parchment but on cheap paper. Students can afford to own their own copies of texts rather than memorizing everything. Personal letters become common, creating networks of correspondence that parallel the trade networks. The Silk Road becomes a highway not just of goods, but of written words. But return to the plague, for disease and knowledge travel together in complex ways. As the Black Death spreads, so do medical texts attempting to understand and treat it. Physicians along the Silk Road compare notes, trying everything from bloodletting to aromatherapy, from quarantine to prayer. Most treatments fail, but the process of observation, recording and sharing information, all made possible by affordable paper, lays groundwork for future medical advances. The Islamic world in particular produces massive medical encyclopedias during this period. Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, written on paper and copied hundreds of times, becomes the standard medical text from Cordoba to Canton. It synthesizes Greek, Indian, Persian and Arab medical knowledge, creating a truly international approach to healing. When plague strikes, physicians consult these texts, looking for patterns, precedents, hope. The social changes brought by plague accelerate the changes brought by paper. As traditional authorities fail to stop the dying, people seek new sources of knowledge. Books on practical subjects, agriculture, crafts, trade, become popular. The survivors of the plague, finding themselves in a world with fewer people but the same amount of land and wealth, have both the means and the motivation to educate themselves. Paper also carries the emotional response to plague. Poems of lamentation, personal accounts of loss, theological attempts to understand why God allows such suffering, all are written, copied, shared. The human experience of catastrophe is preserved, creating a record that helps future generations understand that they're not alone in facing disaster. The technologies for combating disease travel on paper too. Quarantine procedures, first developed in Italian ports, are written down and shared. The idea spreads faster than any disease, carried by documents that explain how long to isolate ships, how to identify symptoms, how to organise civic responses to outbreak. It's imperfect knowledge, based on observation rather than understanding of germs, but it's knowledge that saves lives. Even the economic disruptions of plague are documented on paper, creating records that historians will use to understand how societies collapse and rebuild. Price lists show the wild fluctuations as labour becomes scarce. Wills proliferate as people face mortality. Business contracts adapt to a world where any party might die before completion. Paper captures it all, preserving the texture of lived experience during catastrophe. As you rest safely in your bed, free from the plagues that once travelled the Silk Road, consider how knowledge and disease have always travelled together. The same connections that allow pathogens to spread also allow remedies to be shared. The same paper that records deaths also preserves the wisdom that will eventually conquer disease. The Silk Road carried both creation and destruction, but in the long run, the human capacity to learn, to record, to share knowledge proves stronger than any plague. Let the rustling of ancient paper fade into the sound of waves lapping at harbour walls as we explore how the Great Road began its slow transformation into memory. Like a great river that gradually changes course, leaving its old channel to become first a series of pools, then a dry depression where water once flowed, the Silk Road begins its slow fade from the world's main artery of trade into something more ethereal. A memory, a metaphor, a ghost of connection that haunts the modern imagination. The change doesn't happen suddenly, with proclamations or battles, but gradually, like silk itself aging from brightness into the gentle pallor of antiquity. The first whispers of change come from the sea. Portuguese navigators, following routes that Prince Henry's cartographers have drawn from accumulated knowledge, much of it derived from Arab sailors who learned from Chinese navigators, round the Cape of Good Hope. Vasco da Gama reaches India in 1498, and suddenly the equation of global trade shifts. Why spend months crossing deserts, paying tariffs to dozens of rulers, risking bandits and storms, when ships can carry more cargo more cheaply, answering to no authority but wind and wave? In the counting houses of Venice and Genoa, merchants who grew rich on the land route do their calculations with increasing worry. A shipload of pepper arriving directly from India cost a fraction of the same spice arriving via Alexandria after its long overland journey. The mathematics are inexorable. One by one, the great merchant houses shift their investments from camel caravans to sailing ships, from the dusty roads of Central Asia to the blue highways of the open ocean. But the sea route is only part of the story. In the Ottoman Empire, which now controls many of the Silk Road's western terminals, a different calculation takes place. The sultans, seeing the wealth that flows through their territories, raise taxes on transit trade. What seems like clever fiscal policy becomes slow strangulation. Each increase in tariffs makes sea routes more attractive. Each lost caravan means less revenue, requiring higher taxes on those who remain, creating a spiral that ends with empty caravanserais and silent roads. The discovery of the Americas adds another blow. Spanish galleons begin carrying silver from Potosi directly across the Pacific to Manila, where Chinese merchants eagerly trade silk and porcelain for precious metal. This trans-Pacific trade creates a new Silk Road, one that bypasses Central Asia entirely. The merchants of Samarkand and Bukhara watch their centuries-old networks become irrelevant, replaced by routes they cannot control or even influence. Technology too plays its part in the fading. Gunpowder, which travelled the Silk Road from China to transform warfare worldwide, now makes the nomadic cavalries that protected and preyed on caravans obsolete. The Mongol-style empires that unified and protected the routes give way to sedentary states more interested in controlling territory than facilitating movement. Without the protection of horse archer armies, without the unifying force of nomadic empires, the Silk Road fragments into local routes serving local needs. In the Oasis cities, the changes felt gradually but inexorably. Kashgar's Great Sunday Market continues, but now it serves mainly regional trade. The foreign merchants, those polyglot cosmopolitans who spoke 6 languages and carried goods from Rome to Beijing, are replaced by local traders dealing in local products. The caravanserais, those architectural poems to hospitality and commerce, fall into disrepair. Some become stables for local farmers, others are quarried for building stone, many simply melt back into the earth from which they were built. The intellectual traditions of the Silk Road face their own challenges. The printing press, invented in China but perfected in Europe, creates a new kind of a knowledge network that doesn't require physical travel. Ideas can now move via books shipped in bulk, rather than carried in the minds of scholars. The personal transmission of knowledge, master to student, tradition to tradition, gives way to impersonal but efficient mass production of texts. Watch a Buddhist monastery in Khotan as the last foreign students leave. For centuries, monks from China, Tibet and India gathered here to study, translate and debate. Now the Chinese students stay in China, where their own Buddhist traditions have matured. The Indian connection has been severed by Islamic conquests. The Tibetan students find the journey too dangerous, the rewards too meagre. The monastery continues with local monks, but the international character that made it a beacon of learning fades like colours in an ancient painting. The Sogdian language, once the lingua franca of trade from Constantinople to Chang'an, disappears entirely. The last speakers die without passing on their tongue, and with it dies 1,000 years of commercial wisdom, poetry and song. Other languages fill the gap, Persian here, Turkic there, Chinese in the east, but the unifying linguistic thread is cut. Merchants must now learn multiple languages or rely on intermediaries, adding cost and complexity to trade. Even the goods that define the Silk Road find new sources and routes. Silk production spreads beyond China. Byzantium guards its stolen silkworms as jealously as China once did. Persia develops its own distinctive styles. Eventually, even Europe learns the secret. Spices find their way to European markets via Portuguese and Dutch ships. The precious goods that once justified the enormous risks and costs of overland transport become commodities, available to middle-class consumers rather than just the elite. Yet the Silk Road doesn't truly die. It transforms. In the border regions between Russia and China, local trade continues, carrying tea northward and furs southward. Pilgrims still walk the old routes, following paths sanctified by centuries of devotion. In the 19th century, European explorers and archaeologists rediscover the Silk Road, though it was never truly lost to the people who lived along it. These explorers, Sven Hedin, Aurel Stein, Paul Pelliot, come seeking the romance of the past and find it in abundance. They uncover the library cave at Dunhuang with its treasure trove of manuscripts. They map the old routes, excavate buried cities, photograph crumbling caravanserais. Their work creates a new kind of Silk Road, one that exists in museums and imagination rather than commercial reality. The advent of railroads seems briefly to promise a revival. The Trans-Siberian Railway, completed in 1916, follows parts of the old northern route. Travellers can now journey from Moscow to Beijing in weeks rather than months, in comfort rather than hardship. But the railroad creates its own geography, connecting points rather than regions, creating development along its tracks while leaving the spaces between to continue their slow fade into emptiness. In the 20th century, political divisions complete what economics began. The Iron Curtain falls across the old routes, making travel between communist and capitalist spheres difficult or impossible. The Chinese-Soviet split adds another barrier. The ancient cosmopolitan cities find themselves trapped within national borders, their international connections severed by ideology as thoroughly as they were once severed by economics. Yet even as the physical Silk Road fades, its metaphorical power grows. It becomes a symbol of globalization before the term exists, proof that humans have always reached beyond their horizons to connect with distant others. UNESCO begins designating Silk Road sites as World Heritage locations, recognizing that these ruins and remnants represent not just historical curiosity, but fundamental human values. As you drift towards sleep, consider how endings can also be transformations. The Silk Road as a commercial highway may have faded, but its deeper meaning, the human drive to connect, to exchange, to learn from difference, continues in new forms. Every international flight traces paths first imagined by Silk Road dreamers. Every cultural exchange echoes conversations in ancient caravanserais. Every translation bridges gaps first recognized by Silk Road scholars. Let the dust settle on the old paths as we prepare to see how their spirit rises again in our interconnected age. In the pre-dawn darkness of a Beijing morning, as the first high-speed trains prepare for their westward journeys, something ancient stirs in the modern world. The rails that carry these bullets of steel and glass follow in many places routes first worn into the earth by camel caravans. The passengers checking their smartphones, sipping coffee, preparing for meetings in Qian or Urumqi, are the inheritors of traders who made similar journeys with wildly different technology but remarkably similar purposes: to connect, to profit, to understand what lies beyond their own horizons. Today's China speaks of the Belt and Road Initiative, consciously evoking the Silk Road's memory to describe infrastructure projects that span continents. New highways parallel ancient paths. Fiber optic cables carry information where silk once travelled. Pipelines move energy resources along corridors first mapped by merchants seeking jade and gold. The metaphor is powerful, precisely because the original Silk Road still resonates in human imagination as the archetypal network of peaceful exchange. But the modern Silk Road exists in forms both more subtle and more pervasive than government initiatives. Watch a student in Samarkand video chatting with a colleague in Silicon Valley, their conversation flowing through networks that would seem like magic to the merchants who once made Samarkand great. They discuss artificial intelligence, share code, debate philosophy, creating intellectual bridges as surely as their predecessors created commercial ones. The language they use is English rather than Sogdian. The medium is electrons rather than camel trains, but the fundamental human action remains unchanged. In the fashion houses of Milan and Paris, designers study patterns from Uzbek ikat fabrics, Chinese embroidery, Persian carpet designs. They're not copying but conversing, taking traditional motifs and reimagining them for contemporary aesthetics. A dress on a Paris runway might combine Mongol riding coat influences with Japanese minimalism and Turkish textile techniques, creating something that belongs fully to no single tradition yet speaks eloquently of all of them. The Silk Road's religious legacy continues to evolve. In California, a meditation center teaches Buddhist practices that traveled from India through Central Asia to China, then to Japan, and finally to America. Each transmission adding layers of interpretation. The meditation instructions might be given in English, but they carry within them the whispers of Sanskrit, the echoes of Chinese, the refinements of Japanese, creating a practice that embodies the Silk Road's gift for synthesis. Food tells its own stories of continuation. In a London restaurant, a chef prepares lamb with techniques learned in Xinjiang, seasoning it with spices that follow the same supply chains their medieval predecessors did, though now they travel by container ship and cargo plane rather than camelback. Diners taste in each bite the accumulated wisdom of nomadic cooking, settled agriculture, and modern gastronomy. The restaurant itself, with its Central Asian decor and international clientele, recreates something of the old caravanserai atmosphere. The antiquities trade, both legal and illegal, represents a darker continuation of Silk Road patterns. Just as precious goods once flowed from east to west, now ancient artifacts make similar journeys, though increasingly, the flow reverses as wealthy Asian collectors repatriate cultural treasures. Museums struggle with the ethics of displaying Silk Road artifacts far from their origins, while source countries demand the return of their heritage. These debates echo ancient tensions about who owns beauty, who profits from culture, who has the right to preserve or display the past. In the realm of ideas, the Silk Road's legacy of translation continues with unprecedented vigour. Machine translation, imperfect but improving, allows real-time communication between people who share no common language. A researcher in Tehran can read papers from Tokyo, comment on them in Persian, and receive responses in Japanese, with artificial intelligence serving the role once played by multilingual scholars in Bukhara's translation houses. The COVID-19 pandemic provided an unexpected reminder of the Silk Road's dual nature as carrier of both connection and contagion. Like the Black Death centuries earlier, the virus followed trade routes, spreading from a Chinese city to the entire world within months. But unlike medieval populations, we could track its movement in real time, share genetic sequences instantly, develop vaccines through international collaboration. The same networks that spread disease also spread the knowledge to combat it. Modern pilgrimage routes retrace ancient paths, though the pilgrims often seek cultural rather than purely religious experiences. Tourist agencies offer Silk Road tours, taking travellers from Qian to Istanbul in air-conditioned comfort. These modern pilgrims photograph the same monuments Marco Polo described, buy souvenirs in the descendants of the same bazaars, stay in hotels built near ancient caravanserai ruins. They seek authenticity while wrapped in modern convenience, experiencing a sanitized echo of historical hardship. Universities along the old route create new partnerships that would have delighted ancient scholars. Students from Tashkent study in Venice, researchers from Istanbul collaborate with colleagues in Dunhuang, archaeologists from a dozen nations work together to preserve Silk Road sites. Academic conferences on Silk Road topics bring together scholars whose intellectual ancestors might have met in the libraries of Baghdad or the monasteries of Khotan. The digital Silk Road deserves special attention. E-commerce platforms allow a craftsperson in Kyrgyzstan to sell felt products to customers in Canada, payment flowing through electronic networks, goods shipped via supply chains that would astound medieval merchants. Social media creates virtual caravanserais where people share experiences, debate ideas, form communities across vast distances. The internet itself embodies the Silk Road ideal, a network that gains value from connection, that thrives on diversity, that carries both treasures and dangers. Climate change adds urgency to Silk Road memory. The Taklamakan desert expands, threatening the remaining Oasis cities. Water, always precious along the route, becomes scarcer. The glaciers that fed the rivers that made the oases possible are retreating. Environmental scientists study how ancient communities adapted to climate shifts, looking for lessons applicable to our warming world. The Silk Road's history of adaptation, of finding ways to survive in harsh conditions, offers both warnings and hope. Even in space, the Silk Road extends its metaphorical reach. The Chinese space station is named Tiangong, Heavenly Palace, echoing the celestial imagery that Silk Road travellers used to navigate by stars. International cooperation in space exploration follows patterns of shared risk and reward, familiar to any Sogdian merchant. The technologies that enable space travel, from metallurgy to mathematics, carry within them innovations that first spread along the Silk Road. As this long journey through history draws to its close, as your consciousness prepares to cross the border into sleep, consider how the Silk Road's truest legacy lies not in any physical trace, but in the idea it represents. It proved that humans will always seek connection across distance, that difference can be a source of wealth rather than conflict, that the journey itself transforms both traveller and destination. Your own dreams tonight might carry you along moon-silvered paths where silk whispers its secrets, where the sound of camel bells mixes with smartphone notifications, where ancient wisdom and modern knowledge dance together like partners who have always known each other's steps. The Silk Road continues not in any single route or initiative, but in every human action that reaches across difference toward understanding. As the night deepens around you like the desert darkness that once swallowed caravans, let the eternal rhythm of the Silk Road, departure and arrival, giving and receiving the known and the unknown, carry you into peaceful sleep. And now, dear traveller, as our long journey along the Silk Road approaches its end, let us rest for a moment at this final caravanserai of consciousness, this border post between waking and sleeping, between story and dream. You've travelled far tonight, from the first obsidian traders walking paths that animals had worn, to the digital highways where information flows like silk once did. You've crossed deserts with Zhang Qian, meditated in cave temples with Buddhist monks, marvelled at Roman ladies touching silk for the first time, survived sandstorms and savoured the prosperity of Tang dynasty markets. Let's glide once more over this route, but gently now, like a bird on evening thermals, seeing the whole tapestry spread below. From China's mulberry groves where patient women unwound the cocoons of dreaming caterpillars, the threads of connection spread westward, but also eastward, northward, southward, creating not a road but a web. Each thread in this web carried more than its own weight. Silk carried status, jade carried virtue, glass carried new ways of seeing, horses carried speed and power, paper carried ideas that would outlive empires. You've seen how the road was never just about trade, but about transformation. Every merchant who returned from a long journey came back changed, carrying within them taste for foreign foods, ears attuned to different music, minds expanded by alien philosophies. Every city the road touched became more than it was, more cosmopolitan, more creative, more complex. The road proved that diversity is not just tolerable, but essential, that the strange and foreign carry gifts we didn't know we needed. Perhaps you're thinking now of your own life's journey, of the paths you've taken and those still unwinding before you. Tomorrow when you wake, the morning light might catch a silk scarf or cotton sheet, and for just a moment you might remember that its fibres connect you to farmers half a world away, to traditions older than memory, to the endless human story of making beautiful things and sharing them across impossible distances. Next time you taste pepper on your food, let your mind wander to the Malabar coast where it grew, to the ships that carried it, to all the hands it passed through to reach your table. When you see the moon, remember the caravans that navigated by its light, the way it looked exactly the same to Chinese silk workers and Roman senators, to Sogdian merchants and Buddhist pilgrims, creating a celestial connection that preceded and outlasted all earthly roads. Now, what are the most soothing journeys you can imagine? I asked at the beginning of our travels together. Has this gentle wander through time earned a place among them? Have the patient footsteps of countless travellers created a path in your consciousness where peace can walk? The Silk Road's greatest gift was always the demonstration that connection is possible, that distance can be overcome, that difference enriches rather than threatens. If you'd like more dusk-lit journeys through history's quieter corners, more stories told in the tempo of settling breath and softening thought, allow the sleepy bell to guide you back. There are always more paths to explore, more connections to trace, more wonders waiting just beyond the next ridge of consciousness. But for now, rest. Let the images of our journey settle into your dreams like silk settling into folds, finding their natural drape. Perhaps tonight you'll dream of camel bells that sound like evening chimes, of oses that appear just when hope runs thin, of strangers who become friends over shared tea in a caravanserai courtyard. Perhaps you'll dream of threads, silk threads, golden threads, threads of connection and understanding that weave through your own life in ways you're only beginning to perceive. The ancient winds that push ships across monsoon seas, that sang through the Taklamakan sands, that carried the scent of spices through bizarre streets, those same winds are blowing still, whispering their timeless message. You are part of something larger. Your story is woven into the great tapestry. Your journey matters in ways you may never fully know. Until our paths cross again on another evening when history wants to share its secrets, when the past offers its hand to walk you toward rest, sleep deeply. Dream kindly. Let the ancient winds keep you company through all the hours of the night, carrying you safely toward dawn on routes mapped by starlight and memory, by hope and human kindness. Good night, fellow traveller. May your dreams be silk smooth and star-guided. May your rest be as deep as the desert silence. May you wake refreshed and ready for whatever journeys await. The Silk Road continues in you, in all of us who dare to reach beyond the familiar toward the wonderful unknown. Good night,